We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H, and this week I'm here with...
Lee Overstreet, pinch hitting once again for Tom, who has the plague.
Apparently, something like that. Yeah, he is ill. He warned me last week that he was like super busy this week and wasn't going to be able to record on a Tuesday, which we've been doing as of late. So we were going to be prepared for Monday night, but then he's like, yeah, I am super sick and still super busy. So Tom is away this week, but thankfully, I pinged you at like noon on Monday or something like that.
Yeah,
Lee?
you gave me 24 hours, which normally wouldn't be bad, but like every other American, I'm waiting till the last second to do my taxes, so I'm trying to gather everything. But you know, it's kind of a nice excuse. I can't do my taxes today. I've got to talk to Rob.
There you go. Well, I must say, sincerely, thank you very much, Lee, because
no problem,
it's important that we answer all these people's questions because this is AV Rant. This is the show where we answer your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask, and please ask by emailing us. Our email address is question@avrant.com. That is the place to send your questions. Please send them there. You can contact us in other ways, though, just to be social. For example, on Facebook, that's facebook.com/avrantpodcast. You can also find us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/avrant. And you can find us on Twitter as well. I am at First Reflect there. Tom is at avrant_Tom. And if you want to send us individual messages via email for some reason, my email address is rob@avrant.com. Tom's is tom@avrant.com. And people can reach out to Lee Overstreet if they want to as well, right?
Yes, they can. They can find me on Twitter at Lee Overtweet. And I've also had people send me email ever since I said my email address really quickly on one podcast.
Okay. Yep.
That's kind of funny and strange. I don't guess I mind, but I'm never going to say it again. I'm not going to say it again because if I want to see how many people are that sleuthy and can like go find it in a previous podcast. But at Lee Overtweet, and also invite people to see if they can guess my Instagram handle based on what I've done with my Twitter handle. So I like to give people puzzles.
Twitter handle.
It's all sort of pun-based and puzzle-based, so have a good time finding me. I'm not that hard to find. I'm out there.
Well, I intended to see Shazam, but that didn't happen, so I can't give any review of that. I did finally watch the My Little Pony movie, so that was delightful. There you go.
Are you a brony? No disrespect. I actually think that's kind of cool, you know.
I mean, I guess you'd have... I mean, I am an adult male who enjoys the My Little Pony franchise, so I guess in that respect, I'm not, like, part of the fandom. I don't go to any conventions or,
all right, then you're not really total brony, but you're
I guess not.
Brony adjacent.
I'm an
That's
adult
cool.
fan. Yeah, people are probably surprised. Season 9 is starting as the last season of that show, so farewell, My Little Pony.
Aww.
That's okay. I've got She-Ra now to keep me company. Another kid's show on Netflix. That's fantastic.
I just watch documentaries. That's I'm so boring. No superheroes for me. No cartoons anymore. Wait, that's not true. On Netflix, there's a really raunchy cartoon called Big Mouth.
Yes, there is. Yep.
If you haven't seen that and you like and you can handle the terrible stuff,
no, it isn't.
It's adorable, but it is also raunchy. Like it's middle school kind of adorable
it's
issues.
Like,
well, remember
people should talk about that stuff.
Of course they should, but don't watch it with like sensitive family members.
Yeah,
it's not for kids.
People could easily get offended. Yes, that is very true.
Boy, that's a good animated series on Netflix. I highly recommend.
I want the second season of One Punch Man. When the heck is that coming out? Anyway, this is not the show where we talk about cartoons on Netflix. We answer home theater and AV questions. But first, we want to thank our listeners of the week, who are people who support this podcast in some way. You can do so financially if you want to go to our website, which is avrant.com. You can go over to the right-hand side on the desktop version, which I should mention again, because if you go to the mobile version, you're not going to see the donation link. Scroll down to the bottom if you're on mobile and click desktop version, please, because over on the right, it says support AV Rant, and there it'll take you to PayPal. You do not have to have a PayPal account. You can just use a credit card if you don't want to sign up with PayPal. And there you can give us a one-time donation, which is something that Brian W. did. So thank you very much. There might have been other people who donated. I don't know. Tom is the person who sees all the donations come in. Brian let me know via email that he donated, so that's why you get thanked this week.
Thank you, Brian, and everyone else. And as we've pointed out many times, there is no upper limit to the amount you can donate.
That is true.
So if you want to pull out your American Express Black or whatever color the Elite use, I don't know. Maybe it's a transparent. It could be.
It's titanium now. They got to get that Apple credit card.
Or maybe like it's chrome. Yeah, a chromed out titanium card. Put whatever dollar figure you want on there. Just keep hitting 0 after the 1.
That'd be nice. You can also support us financially via Patreon if you'd like to. That's like an automatic monthly donation, like a voluntary subscription if you want to think of it that way. So that's over there at patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up. We presently have 82 patrons, so thanks very much to everyone there, including Brian W. That's a familiar name. Yeah, he's also a patron. So thanks for being a double donor there, Brian. Brian also wanted to say that he has been into home theater for 18 years now, but for several years he had to put away his full surround sound system, and he pretty much had to just use headphones while he was living in an apartment, which suffering. I understand that. Yeah. But now he's back into a house, so he says we're helping him to fill in the gaps sort of in his knowledge and experience, all the newest formats, both audio and video, because, hey, we got all this 4K and 8K and HDR stuff on the video side, and of course Atmos and DTSX and Oro 3D on the audio side. So he says a lot has changed, and he appreciates our help catching him up on all the latest. So thank you, Brian. That's awesome for the support.
Absolutely. And he reminded me of my old days of my first what qualified as a home theater. Did you see the pictures I sent you, Rob?
Yes, in fact, we will share those on YouTube here for everyone to enjoy.
Look at my 1990 system. It's a 27-inch RCA semi-flat screen. It was like flat in the middle and a little curve on the edge.
Semi-flat screen. It is a cathode ray tube TV, folks.
Dude, at the time, that thing was something else. That it was about $700 in 1989 when I got it. And what's that today? Probably about $1,200, you know?
So $1,200 or $1,300, I'd say,
I plunked down some cash, and I've got a VCR there, and I've got my Panasonic rack stereo system, 3-way speakers with 12-inch woofers. And then the following Christmas, I went and got the Hi-Fi VCR. Honest to goodness, that served me well up until about the year 2000 when I finally got surround sound.
You got something with a keyboard down there hooked up too. What's going on with that?
In the photo, you'll see a Commodore 64 because that's how I gamed at the time.
On your 27-inch tube TV?
Yes, in stereo. Yeah. So at the time, man, that was something else. And what the picture you're showing is my brief bachelor pad in Panama City, Florida in 1990. So, man,
that was pretty cutting edge at the time, man.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that huge remote control on the coffee table, but that's the part of the RCA line of I can't remember what they called it, but it controlled multiple RCA devices. And so it controlled my VCR and my TV at the same time. And man, I was more than happy to show that off to people. So just flash them back. It's fun. It's so much fun.
Have indeed changed in 20 years or so. Well, we also want to thank folks who support the podcast in non-financial ways, and just let us know if you do something to help out the podcast. Keith H did that. He let Accessories for Less know that his Marantz SR7012 AV receiver purchase was thanks to listening to AVRant. Jeremy Porter has a very cool story. He says several years ago, we commented on this podcast about the beautiful do-it-yourself subwoofer cabinet that he made for himself, which I remember that. I couldn't dig through all the... I don't know how many years ago it was, so I'm sorry, Jeremy, I didn't have the photo of it on hand, but no,
that would be
recall.
Difficult.
Yeah, there's a lot of emails to go through. But yeah, he made this gorgeous subwoofer cabinet. We said on the podcast he could probably turn that into a small business if you ever wanted to create custom cabinets, speaker and subwoofer cabinets for other people.
And guess what?
Guess what? 3 years ago, he decided he's going to do even more than that, because I believe he actually said he's like an acoustic or electrical engineer as well. So he's like, I can do more than just make cabinets. He created Porter Edwards, which Austin Hi-Fi Speakers in Texas there. He made his own small business. Now, right now, his website is basically a placeholder. You can sign up to subscribe to his newsletter, but it would determined to make his own custom handmade hi-fi speakers. So it turns out that custom designing and sourcing every part of a speaker turns out to be a little bit more work and a little bit more time consuming than he imagined at the beginning of this. So instead of it being a 1-year process like he had hoped, it was a 3-year process. But now is 3 years later, and he's ready to introduce his first consumer speaker product. So he's going to be at the Axpona show, which is taking place this weekend. So if you're listening to this on Friday, April the 12th, Axpona has already started. It's running April.
Right
exactly.
now,
April 12th through 14th, 2019. It's actually just outside of Chicago, but that's the Axpona Hi-Fi show. So he says he wouldn't have gotten there without our podcast encouraging him. So he'd love to meet any fellow AVRant fans. His booth over there is called Porter Acoustics, so go and look for that. And he says for each person who comes by his booth and mentions AVRant, he's going to donate $5 to the podcast.
So anyone that just mentions AVRant to him,
that's right.
$5 to this podcast. So yes, Chicago's a big town. Surely there are some AVRant listeners there.
I hope so, or folks who are going
and
to Axpona, because people do travel to go to that show. You whisper it to him like Hail Hydra, I guess, the AVRant.
And then leave the room, put on a little disguise, and come back again and say it again. So
that's right. But on that tip, I'm going to take a little tangent here, but on that tip of designing and sourcing speakers and running your own small business, making that, like this was posted on a public forum and everything like that, so I assume it's fair game to say, and I'm not disparaging anyone in any way. Folks might know Dennis Murphy, who runs Philharmonic Audio. Dennis is like a famous crossover designer, and then he started making his own speaker designs at Philharmonic Audio. And some people notice, Gary in particular, he noticed that like the website has kind of not advanced, and that it was saying that things are on back order, or that speakers wouldn't be shipping for a while in that. And Dennis went on to one of the big forums. I don't know if it was AVS Forum or one of the other big forums, but he was saying basically it was almost a one-man show over there at Philharmonic Audio. He was literally hand wiring every crossover for every speaker that he was selling. And he said he got behind on orders, which is understandable. I mean, in a good sense, he was like overwhelmed, as in,
right. I mean, it's nice to have a lot of orders, but
but he got behind, and basically, I mean, he said this himself, had like an anxiety attack, a panic attack, which is nothing trivial. That's important stuff, and that's sort of why things have fallen behind. But he's back on track now and getting back and caught up on orders, and shut down taking in new orders so that he could catch back up on things.
That's a strange thing that can happen nowadays because of the internet and communications, modern communications. You can find yourself popular quickly.
Exactly.
I mean, like way more than, and if you're not ready to grow, it can weigh on you like crazy.
I want to personally wish Dennis Murphy the best, because I mean he's a fantastic guy and a real stand-up guy, and very open about everything that's going on, and that's the way to handle it. Unfortunate, for folks who are waiting, but even worse in a situation where someone's health is being affected by this. But just want to be aware that a lot of these companies, these online companies, they are small companies. They are sometimes, 2-3 man operations, and there's a lot of expectation that sometimes gets placed on anybody who's running their own show, and things it's in a way easy to make things look exceedingly professional these days, like you're some huge, 200-person company, and that isn't necessarily the case. So, just want folks to be aware, be patient, be kind, reach out to people when you're not sure what's going on. If we're being forgiving
of Tesla for not delivering cars on time, surely we can forgive some individuals for being popular.
And yet it's another reason why someone like David Fabricant, again over at Ascend Acoustics, that I'm a fan of. I mean, not a super dissimilar situation. He's got more employees than that, but he's still definitely would classify as a small company, and orders pile in, and it's amazing what small business owners do to run what they're going on there. So big thumbs up to Jeremy, and best of luck to you, and well wishes to everyone who's doing that, because it's a tremendous effort that's put in.
Absolutely.
That's my little tangent. Well, let's strike on into the news. We've got quite a bit of news, so Lee, take it away.
We do, yeah. News time. SVS, our favorites, launched their Prime Pinnacle Tower speakers for $1,600 a pair. They say the goal was to make a tower speaker that gets as close as possible in performance to their $2,000 per pair Ultra Towers, while being less expensive and physically smaller. It borrows the Ultra Series driver materials for its 5.25 inch mid-range driver, and has the same sensitivity and power handling as the Ultra Tower. Each of its 3 6.5 inch woofers gets its own separate ported enclosure within the cabinet, allowing it to play lower than the $1,000 a pair Prime Towers, but not quite as low as the Ultra Towers. So if you spin that speaker around, There's 3 big holes on the back.
There are 3 ports on the back. This is not the type of thing that we have mentioned sometimes before, where it's basically like a bookshelf speaker on top of, on top of a base. No, this is a true tower speaker. There's an inside cutaway, interesting design inside, where they've kind of put in these angled, piece braces inside that separate these chambers for each of the woofers. The mid-range driver gets its own sealed enclosure. The tweeter, of course, has its own backplane there. But yeah, they've made these. So, I mean, they're still quite deep from front to back. These are not small speakers by any means, but they are slim looking from the front. They don't have the kind of trapezoidal shape that the Ultra Towers do, because those have a side-firing subwoofer driver built in. These have 3 6.5-inch woofers. But yeah, an interesting design, $1,600 a pair, right sort of smack dab in the middle of the price ranges there. And I mean, these are targeted more at a 2-channel setup, I would say, because they don't have a center speaker that exactly matches these.
Do they not have a center at all that has maybe the same tweeter for timbre matching? Or
the Prime series does, the Prime Center, but if you're looking at power handling and output capability, the Prime Center matches perfectly with the Prime Towers. These are the Prime Pinnacle Towers now that are a little bit higher in power handling and higher in output capability. So they're actually a little bit closer to like the Ultra Center, but without using the Ultra Center's tweeters. So these, I think, are aimed more at a 2-channel type of setup. And but yeah.
Is it which one is it that's one step up, that's 1,000 a speaker instead of 800?
That'd be the Ultra Towers.
The Ultra Towers. Those Ultra Towers, I looked briefly, and they seem to have the same tweeter, yet claim a much higher frequency response.
Well, it's a very similar looking tweeter, but
like
it is
listed
not
as a 1-inch silk dome or something. Or
yes,
no,
both of them are, but it is not an actually identical tweeter.
Okay.
They look very similar, but they aren't actually identical to one another. So
right,
yeah,
you're probably right. These are for turntable listeners.
Well, not necessarily only turntable, but more people who are like, I want a dedicated 2-channel listening system. I want tower speakers, but it's mostly for 2-channel, and I wanted something that doesn't quite dominate the room like the Ultra Towers do.
All right.
That's where these slot in at a very nice price point. So
they look nice. They look nice to
design.
me.
Yeah.
Okay, a little bit more news here. Via Carl, THX announced the world's first THX Ultimate Cinema at the Regency Westwood Village Theater in Los Angeles. They've partnered with Barco and Cineonic for this new premium large format, quote-unquote premium large format, that uses dual laser-based Barco projectors to deliver 4K HDR, and they've redone the theater to address acoustics and to offer immersive audio. In a thinly veiled shot at IMAX and Dolby Cinemas, they claim that many exhibitors have been seeking a large format solution that is more flexible and affordable while still being tied to a strong, recognizable brand. So they believe THX Ultimate Cinema can offer that to theater owners. However, it's yet another exclusive proprietary format that will require its own separate master from movie studios. So yeah, it's another way of saying this is a good theater that meets some known standard, but I'm confused as to why it needs a separate master. Is it so?
Well, it'd be they're not. I guess they're not necessarily hitting the exact same nit level as Dolby Cinemas are for their HDR. They have the capabilities of their dual laser Barco projectors instead of the Christie brand projectors that Dolby Cinema uses, or I forget what brand IMAX uses for their laser cinemas, but again, it's different. So all of them have slightly different capabilities, so they want it to be mastered specifically for their format. At present, there's only one of these
but honestly,
THX Ultimate theaters.
Couldn't they all do what some TVs are doing nowadays and just do a sort of scene by scene kind of remapping?
Not how it works in the movie world.
They can't do that
Not in the actual cinema world. So yeah, any studios who want to release theater movies in this specific theater, these THX Ultimate Cinemas, which we imagine there'll be more on the way. It's a little bit more money, a little bit more time. Do another master, do another pass, and we'll see how that goes. But this seems to be the new battleground. Are these large formats?
Man, in my little small town, I'm just happy happy if the movie's not tilted to one
You're
side
right,
when
yeah.
I go see it. So it sounds good to me. And not to be outdone, Sony announced their, quote, Sony Digital Cinema, unquote, premium large format, which will open at the Galaxy Theater in Las Vegas this spring. It's a $1 million 4K HDR laser projection and immersive audio system, also meant to compete with Dolby Cinema and IMAX, with content specifically graded for Sony Digital Cinemas. So yet another standard you have to export your files to. Although Sony said their theater can also just show regular digital cinema package titles like any other theater.
There you go. That's
right.
probably a good idea.
Yeah. So if you want to go through the trouble, or from their own
Yes, from their
editing
own
houses,
Sony pictures, which
sure,
they do have.
they'll
I'm
do
sure those will be graded for
So
Sony
now you
Digital
have
Cinema.
to look up who's making and who's editing and what the theater is and does it match for the ultimate experience. It was already hard enough to see, like, was a movie shot in 3D
Yep.
or did they fake it? You know, or was it shot in this or that, right? So now you have all these things to look for to see if you get a good match.
They're really trying to make movie going into a destination event. You know?
They are. And they might be overdoing it. While they announced it as a laser projection system, Sony also showed their 32-foot micro LED cinema display. So there's speculation they've got a plan to eventually convert Sony Digital Cinemas to huge self-emissive displays, which is exciting. The first thing that pops in my mind, though, is there really no obvious seam between the panels when they do that? I mean, is it really pixel straight up against pixel and you can't see it?
Yeah, the people who've seen, like, Samsung's, the wall display that they've had at several trade shows, and Sony's has their Cletus or Crystal OLED. Or
Cletus?
Crystal
That's a
LED,
good country
not
name.
OLED, but yeah, I know.
Cletus?
Crystal LED display. Cletus. But
Sorry,
no,
it's
people,
just funny.
people are
Cletus.
saying basically if you're about 10 feet away, you can't see any seams or pixels. So,
Really? Okay.
yeah,
So
in
it
a
makes me wonder.
full-size movie theater, you're going to be more than 10 feet away.
I guess so. It just makes me wonder if one day we will order the number of panels we want for the size screen we want and assemble it on our wall, and they'll detect each other, and
That's
boom.
what we're hoping for.
Isn't that coming one day? It just has to. Excuse me. Moving along. You can no longer use AirPlay with Netflix. What? From 2013 until now, you could use AirPlay to send Netflix streams from your iPhone or iPad to an Apple TV. But now that AirPlay 2 is being made available on a whole bunch of TVs and devices, Netflix says it isn't able to detect the exact playback device, and therefore they can't be sure they're sending the best quality possible. So they've decided to drop AirPlay support completely. See, this sounds a little BS-y to me. Because you could identify the new AirPlay 2, and if you didn't detect AirPlay 2, you'd assume it was the first AirPlay and make it work for that.
But what they're saying is they don't know what the end device is, because before AirPlay only worked with the Apple TV, the set-top box Apple TV. So they're like, well, if somebody's using AirPlay, clearly they're sending it to an Apple TV. But now you might be sending it from your iPhone or iPad to a Sony television, to a Samsung television, to...
but that's AirPlay 2.
Yeah, but the thing is, they're saying they can't detect what the end device is, so they don't know which precise stream to send. Right? It's going to be on Amazon Fire TV devices, I think, as well, or something like that. So they're like, we don't know which device. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think it's more about they can't track the data. Because that's what they really, really want to do, and that's what Apple is trying to prevent that from a lot of people. They're trying to be the company of privacy, or at least publicly, outwardly say that they are the company of privacy. It's preventing Netflix from tracking as much data as they would like to. So there's a bit of that going on as well. But outwardly, Netflix is saying it's all because they can't guarantee the highest quality stream. So they've just dropped AirPlay, the whole Apple TV Plus coming in to be a competitive streaming service. We just won't mention that.
Anybody that thinks they're not being tracked at this point is foolish. We all thought it was happening back in the day, and now those paranoid people who thought for sure the government was tracking them, they're all like, see? I mean, I said no to a couple of things on my TV thinking, I wonder if this is going to keep me from watching anything, and it didn't. So maybe I'm not being tracked as much as some other LG owners. I don't know. Breaking news via Martin D. Epson has released their 5050 UB projector. Price is $3,000. As expected, it's very similar to the 5040 UB, but they've refined how they wobble the LCD panels and upped the native contrast. They specifically mentioned supporting 4K HDR at 60 frames per second now, and it has a 16-step manual HDR adjustment. It retains its huge motorized lens shift and zoom range with lens memories and full DCI P3 color. And one HDMI input specifically boosts power output for long, active, or optical HDMI cables. Now, that's nice. So it's got a very sensitive HDMI input. That's kind of cool. But you know what?
It just actually outputs electrical power into the plug there to help power those active or optical HDMI cables. Yeah, I mean all HDMI inputs supposedly do, but some are a little beefier on their output of electricity than others. So these ones, they're like, yeah, here's a port that's meant for that. It'll have.
That's kind of perfect for a projector, isn't it? Now, one thing that makes me wonder. Is it not the case that if you're wobbling an LCD panel, what you're really getting is 4K I60?
Yeah,
it's almost like interlaced television, the way interlaced TV is displayed on a non-interlaced
TV. The pixels are wiggling diagonally, and so you sort of get
diagonally.
One pixel overlaps like
a little
4
bit
pixels, so that's how you kind of get the 4K resolution. Yeah, I mean we sometimes call it wobble K, some people call it faux K, F-A-U-X. Yeah, but they are taking a 1080p panel and wobbling it twice per frame on these ones, so it is not full genuine 4K resolution.
I'm going to call it 4K-I. That's my name for it, because it feels like you're faking, like doubling each line a little bit, just wiggle.
I mean, if you put up a full pixel by pixel checkerboard panel in full 4K resolution, it will not resolve that. It doesn't have that going on. But I think this slots nicely. I mean, the $3,000 MSRP, that's what it is right now if you're buying it directly today on their website. But that'll quickly drop to $2,700, $2,800 because the Epson projectors always do. And that means it slots in really nicely in between the BenQ HT3550. That's a DLP projector that takes a 1080p panel and wobbles it 4 times per frame. But you know, like this Epson, if first of all, the motorized zoom and lens and all that, that's a huge feature for anyone who wants to do the constant image height setup and be able to press a button, lens memory zooms it in, fills your full width of your CinemaScope screen, and then press a button, zooms back out, turns back into 16:9. Can't do that with the BenQ at $1,500, can do that with the 5050 at $3,000 at double the price, but also better black levels, higher contrast, but both have the nice wide color now, so really good to see that. And then above that at, just under $4,000, you got JVC's X790 still in the lineup. So nice that it slots right in there. I think it'll be a good solution for a lot of people.
What's the price point now for a non-wobbling true 4K? Where do you have to get to price-wise?
$5,000 is the least expensive Sony that is genuine 4K, and JVC's least expensive genuine 4K is $6,500.
There you go. So $5,000 gets you into real 4K, but man, the wobbly's got to look good.
Yeah. And honestly, I would take the X790 over the least expensive of the 4Ks because its contrast is much higher. Okay. So I'll take a wobbling panel with much higher contrast and better black levels. That, I agree with you
because I've seen 4K TVs that didn't look as good as my old plasma that was a 1080i.
Yeah,
1366 by 768 because it had fantastic contrast.
Yeah, just the number of pixels really doesn't matter as much to me.
No, because you're rarely sitting so close you can resolve it all anyway. Moving on to some comments. Lee V, what a great name, Lee. Lee V heard our speculation about the new Apple TV Plus streaming service and how Tom thought Apple might be wooing A-list Hollywood talent by basically letting the creators do what they want without a ton of notes and oversight. Lee says that several TV critics online have indicated that it's strongly the opposite, with Apple wielding a very heavy hand to make sure all their original content remains family friendly. I believe that.
That's apparently the situation. I had heard a little bit of that too, and briefly made a comment when Tom said that. But that seems to be the case. They are definitely going for family friendly on this. In fact, they had 1 or 2 shows that were already kind of made, and they're like, those are probably never coming out. Not family friendly enough.
Yeah, like you do have freedom of speech online and freedom to create in this world.
It's not as though there aren't other outlets these days. So
it's just that's what pay channels or for. You know, that's what HBO is for. Carl R. noticed that the Dolby Institute has uploaded a series of tutorials to fully explain how to create Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, and Dolby Atmos for live TV workflows and content. These are aimed at industry professionals, but anyone interested could still try signing up for access. I wonder if the latest Premiere CC would have the ability to do that. I bet it would. I haven't checked because that's so far beyond what I need to do, but since I have a subscription to Premiere, I'm curious what would happen if I tried that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's a fee for this or what is going on. Like the first episode is for free on their website, but I guess there might be a fee associated with that, although I'm not sure. I didn't sign up for that. But I mean, if there are folks out there who are really interested in the nitty-gritty of how this stuff works, and if you know how it's made, that can surely help you understand that. So we'll have the link for that over at avrant.com.
All right, I can't wait to upconvert my high 8 tapes to Dolby Atmos. Hey, they're in stereo. I should come up with something. Kris P heard us talking a while back about how our favorite external streaming boxes, namely the NVIDIA Shield and Apple TV 4K, can't play back YouTube's HDR videos because of their lack of VP9 Profile 2 codec support. But how the NVIDIA Shield is currently the only external streaming box that supports 5.1 audio from YouTube. Some TVs support YouTube HDR from their built-in YouTube apps, but often only at 30 frames per second. So LG's 2018 or newer OLEDs, I can verify this, and Sony's X1 Extreme or X1 Ultimate base TVs seem to be the best option for getting YouTube HDR at 60 frames per second with 5.1 audio output. And like I said, I can verify the HDR is gorgeous on my LG. I'm so happy with it, and it does 60 frames per second, sure enough.
Yep.
However, Kris says the Xbox One X can do it, although not when using the official YouTube app.
Okay.
Since the Xbox can run UWPs, it's Universal Windows Programs, as it's basically just a Windows 10 PC under the hood, you can run other apps that play YouTube videos. Apps that aren't blocked by Google from playing VP9 Profile 2 with 5.1 audio. So, he recommends giving an app called MyTube a try, which sounds a little weird.
MyTube.
MyTube. Everyone's got a tube.
Yes.
we're all just tubes if
Kris
you think about it.
Chris is a strong Microsoft fan. He's an Xbox insider, a Windows insider as well. So he knows his stuff when it comes to everything Microsoft and Windows. So that's an interesting perhaps alternative, but kind of funny that the native YouTube app itself doesn't let you.
I know it is crazy what's going on with these apps built in. They all can do more than they're doing. So
the
you can
boxes
imagine.
can't. I mean, the boxes are all just computers. The NVIDIA Shield can clearly output all of this stuff, although it doesn't have hardware support for VP9 Profile 2, so you'd have to do it in software, which is taxing on the processor.
But what's crazy is all these things are computers, so they could do it, and yet the hardest thing on which to do HDR is a computer.
A little bit.
It's insane.
I mean, it can be done. You can do it. But
I'm just happy my YouTube app on the LG works like it's supposed to. By the way, Kris would also like for anyone interested and knowledgeable to consider signing up to become a Microsoft Edge insider, so you can become one of the 10 people that use Edge. At the moment, Microsoft Edge is still the only web browser that lets you output both HDR and Atmos audio from Netflix, which is crazy. But Microsoft is moving over to a Chromium-based platform. They're just completely giving up. I think that's great. As an insider himself, Kris says that Microsoft really does listen and respond to feedback. Really? But more voices are needed when it comes to AV and home theater related concerns. I'm blown away to hear that they respond to anything anyone says.
Well, he personally wanted to thank anyone who did do what he pleaded on this podcast before, which was to use the Xbox user voice, which is, customer feedback, because, it's something like Dolby Vision was added, although it's only on Netflix at the moment, but we'll see what happens. They clearly have an eye towards putting that on actual games and other things. Hopefully the Ultra HD Blu-ray player at some point, one would think, but not as of the recording date of this podcast, but that and getting Atmos support added onto it as well. So all of those types of things, they are in the pipeline. They do take it under consideration. But more insiders, specifically if you want Edge when it moves over to being Chromium based to continue doing what it's doing.
Maybe they listen to. They might listen to customers when it comes to Xbox, but they're not listening to people when it comes to Windows 10. Doesn't seem like, because sure seems like I'm getting updates every 10 seconds.
They sure are.
And seems like maybe my privacy is being violated and a bunch of stuff's loading that I don't want to load. Moving on. Mike S. first says, thanks for our advice on how to build his seating riser. He's considering filling some of it with sand now. Ooh, that's work. He mostly didn't want to have to carry all the 50-pound bags, but Rob convinced him that it might be worth it. Really? 50-pound? Carry hundreds of pounds of sand into your room. Okay.
What we do for our hobby.
Telling you what, he just wanted to share a pic of how his theater build is coming along. He doesn't have all of the double drywall up yet, but it's nearing drywall completion. He fully drywalled the upper portion of the ceiling, and then the overhead soffits allow him to run his electrical and HVAC within a full drywall shell. Even though it isn't fully finished yet, he can't hear his wife at all. When he's in the room and she's trying to yell downstairs to him, that ticks her off, but he's happy that the soundproofing clearly works. I think we know now why he's building this.
I'm
this is
I'm
his
sure
safe
the request
space.
was, if you're watching movies, I don't want to be bothered by it. So, hey, it goes both ways, doesn't it? You're going to have to install an intercom. Clearly
Yeah.
an intercom will have
She's
to be
going to have
installed,
to
Mike.
text you is what's going to happen, because my wife has done that to me in this house many a times. I just picture this guy sitting quietly and taking deep breaths in his room, not even having the TV on. That was all a ruse, just to have a quiet room. But it looks amazing.
That's awesome, Mike. I'm happy to hear it. And yeah, the effort is well worth it. If you can have a nice silent room, fantastic.
And that stuff looks precise too. As a committed OCD American, let me tell you, that's looking good. So from last week, Lance H has some questions. Lance completely understands why many people like to run their subwoofers a bit hot. He does so himself with his BB2000 and PC2000 pairing, boosting them about 4 dB after having run Audyssey. But how do you know whether or not you are hearing bass levels as intended by the movie makers? Okay. When he saw the 2016 remake of The Magnificent Seven at the theater, he recalls a real punch to the chest with one particular gunshot. But when he watched at home, he didn't get that same experience. However, when he watched A Quiet Place at home, it sounded and felt exactly like it had at a Dolby Cinema. So how do you know what is actually right? Oh, Lord. There are so many places along the chain where things can be calibrated differently and come out differently. There are different speakers. There are different humans doing things wrong here and there. I am not surprised that's the case. And then, of course, you've got your gushy human brain that remembers things one way when maybe it wasn't. So what's exactly right? That's sort of chasing the purple unicorn. We're all trying to get that standard to know what did that director really mean for me to hear?
And particularly in audio, where we don't have truly fixed standards like we do on the video side, it's even more difficult to know with certainty that you're getting it exactly right, and there are lots of variables. However, we can use sort of a systematic approach to say we're getting as close as we can.
Right.
Now, when it comes to something like The Magnificent Seven on disc, maybe not sounding exactly like it did in the theater, that might just be the disc, because movies are remastered for the home release, and sometimes a few little changes are made, or the overall decibel level is decreased. Things like that are frequently done. For example, Disney infamously at this point now, with its release of Marvel titles at least, is drastically compressing the full dynamic range. You are not getting the dynamic range on the home release that you were getting in the theater. So that could be a case where your system is playing back exactly what it's being told to play as far as the signal coming off the disc, but it's not the same as what you heard in the theater. That could be the case. But let's put that aside, because there's nothing your system and the things that you tune your system to do in your house can do about that. That's a decision being made by the studios and how they release the discs. In your house, I come back to a fairly simple concept. First of all, we do have reference volume. And that's key, especially in bass, because as soon as you turn your volume dial lower than full reference volume, you're now not experiencing exactly what the signal was saying to do, and we rapidly lose our ability to detect deep bass. We won't even hear something at 20 hertz whatsoever if it's below about 65 decibels. So if you've turned down something that in the signal was supposed to be 85 or 90, but you're, set your master volume dial down to -10 or -20, which is common, it might be literally inaudible to you. and it shouldn't be. It's there on the disc. So one thing is that theoretically you ought to be listening at full reference volume. Your volume dial should be set to 0.
But that would be
dB point.
exhausting on a regular basis.
Yes. So he mentioned that he runs Audyssey, which means that he has access to Audyssey Dynamic EQ, and we like that feature because what that does is when you turn the master volume dial down, it compensates for our non-linear human hearing and attempts to keep everything at least audible. So one thing you would do is turn on Dynamic EQ if you don't already have that on. On Yamaha receivers, they have something called YPOW volume, which does the same thing, curves of equal loudness. On Onkyo, you'd have to use a THX listening mode and use their THX loudness plus. If you got Anthem, they have Dolby volume, and they've separated out between dynamic range compression and dynamic equalization. So multiple different ways depending on what brand of AV receiver you have, but that type of idea using curves of equal loudness. Now, the other part of this is how you calibrate your system before you play anything back. And what I would highly recommend is you turn your system up to full reference volume, and then you play a bass sweep, preferably on repeat, preferably with you moving from seat to seat. And what you should hear from a linear bass sweep is the same volume throughout that entire sweep. Now, that should be the case at full reference volume. It won't necessarily be the case once you turn the master volume dial down. But if that's what you hear, and in this case, I'm saying you don't even necessarily have to measure it. If you measure it, you might see some ups and downs.
Right.
But let's go by your own perception. It should sound as though that bass sweep is the same volume all the way throughout. That would mean, if that's what you're hearing at your seat, it means that you're hearing what the signal said to do. The signal said play all these frequencies one after another, all at the same volume, and that's what you heard. Now, if you play back something at full reference volume, or hopefully dynamic EQ or YPOW volume or whatever is doing its job well, you play that back, whatever the signal came off of the disc, you are reasonably certain that you are hearing the volume level that the disc requested your system play. Now,
At least then...
Yeah.
At least then, now it's not on you.
That's right. It's not on you. It's not on your speakers. If it's different from what you heard in the theater, it might just be the mix that they put on the disc. But at least you know when the signal says play this bass note at this volume, that's what you're getting. And that bass sweep is what you rely on to tell you that you're getting things, hearing them accurately.
That's all you can do. He's got his PB2000 and PC2000 on either side of his TV. His setup is open to his kitchen, but even so, the total space still falls within the small room category as far as cubic footage goes. He isn't sure he's ever really felt, quote, pressurization like we've talked about. Sorry, I have something going on with my headphones. I am distracted. I lost one ear, and I hope I'm not having a stroke. Okay. Okay. He's got all his speakers set to small with 80 hertz crossovers, and he uses the flat Audyssey target curve. Could it just be something to do with his setup? Or is there a way for him to easily tell whether he's getting full pressurization or not? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but pressurization is not a particular sound. It just, it's not, you're not going to hear something go, oh, there's pressurization.
No.
It helps you get the even sound at all the bass notes you're looking for, especially the deepest bass notes.
I mean, I almost regret now that we've said it so many times because... So let's go back to what are we measuring when we talk about decibel levels? Well, we're measuring SPL, sound pressure level. That's what the P in SPL stands for, is the sound pressure level, and we're measuring it on a scale that we call decibels. That is... when we're talking about fully pressurizing a room, the reason a really huge room is very difficult to pressurize with really deep bass is that bass waves are extremely long, and we never hear just the direct line from the subwoofer is over there. It could be 20 feet away from you, across the room from you is 20 feet away, but we never actually hear just the sound that was a direct line from that subwoofer driver to your ear because the wave itself is too long for that to have happened. It's 55 feet long down at 20 hertz.
That's right. You'd have to have a big room.
The waveform went right past you, bounced off your back wall, came back. If you're in a small room, like he says he is, it's bounced back and forth multiple times
like
before your
times
brain ever even registered that you're hearing it. Now, there's a couple of things going on. for one thing, we've got this inverse square law when it comes to how loud something is. So the farther away you are, the weaker it is. So if you're in a really large room, then that sound wave is traveling a greater distance before it reflects off of something. It's losing power, loses power when it hits the wall, loses power on its way back. So there's all of that going on. But more than that, if you're in a small room, that really long bass wave bounced back and forth multiple times, you know, across all your walls, ceiling, and everything that's bouncing around. All of that energy is more or less being kept in that small room as it bounces back and forth. There's some energy being lost, but it's bouncing back and forth, and it's also doubling up on itself and crossing over, and all these waves are interacting. And so what you end up experiencing is, we call it room gain. It means that the energy didn't just come out of the subwoofer, travel past you, and escape off into an open field.
Right.
It was contained within this small room, bouncing back and forth, that energy decreasing but being retained in that small room. And so you get this room gain that helps to keep the sound pressure level higher, even though the output of your subwoofer might not be tremendous. You know, it started at just barely enough, but that energy is contained and kept within this small room. And so that room remains at the sound pressure level that we requested at 115 decibels, if we're talking full reference volume for a instantaneous peak. In a really large room, there's more opportunity for that energy to be lost, for it to escape. If we're talking some of these people who have, 20,000 cubic feet that we're talking about, and it's going upstairs and getting into vents and venting out the attic and stuff, that pressure is being lost. That energy is being dissipated, it's traveling a greater distance before it ever bounces off of something, and it's just being lost to other parts of the house, being absorbed, being diffused, and going out of vents and all this type of stuff. So the pressure, much like if you're thinking about, if you just got a hose in a small sealed room and you keep pumping water into it, the pressure goes up. If you have a huge open room with vents where that pressure can escape, the pressure isn't as high.
Am I wrong to picture a bathtub with water versus a lake with still water? And I make a wave in the bathtub,
right,
and the wave back and forth, the ripple bounce off the outside.
That's exactly what's going on.
You can see those waves there, and so it's essentially pressurized. That energy you put in dropping a pebble into your bathtub is preserved more than if it's a gigantic swimming pool.
Exactly. The height of those waves, with the amplitude, the sound pressure, will be higher if you're retaining that energy within small boundaries and it's bouncing back.
But if you have a huge warehouse-sized living room, you're still going to hear bass.
You're going to hear it.
You just need a little more pressure, and that's why you tend to need a bigger subwoofer.
You need the original pressure that was output by the subwoofer to be massively higher, because you're not getting the help of the room gain. You're not getting the help of this small contained space that's bouncing the sound back and forth and keeping that pressure inside, like a small contained vessel would for any fluid. Air's a fluid. So now you're saying you're in what is technically a small room. How do you know if you're getting pressurization? Well, you go back to that bass sweep.
There you go.
And if that bass sweep is a constant volume all the way down to 20 hertz, the lowest that you can hear, congratulations, your room is fully pressurized. You are retaining the sound pressure level that's being requested by the signal.
Also, you probably can't breathe in a few minutes if it's that pressurized.
But instead of having a dip, that's gone. Now, if you just want a piece of content I can point you to where you will know whether or not you're getting really deep pressurization, I like the real opening of The Dark Knight Rises. This is when there's sort of the ice and the Batman logo sort of cracks in the ice. Well, underneath that sound of the ice and the minimal score that's going on at that point, underneath all that is a really super deep bass note heartbeat.
Ooh.
And if you are not getting pretty much full sound pressure level at the requested frequency down there, which is right around 22 or 23 hertz. It's way down there. You won't notice it at all. You won't even know that heartbeat is there, but it's there.
Ooh,
and your whole chest is going to feel it if your system is playing it back properly. So it's an easy test track, because you'll be like, there's a whole darn heartbeat going on in there that I never noticed through my, phone.
Good note. Good to know. Although, just practicality of our living spaces prevents us sometimes from getting so-called full pressurization, but you're still going to enjoy bass.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yeah. It's just that normally there's a roll-off at the low end there. Yeah.
All right, so David F. has a question. A little while back, David told us how he is looking to buy his forever speakers. He had a pretty long list of candidates at the time, and he asked if he should maybe just pick one, partially based on our recommendation, and then just ignore everything else. Let ignorance be bliss. I've done that a little bit before. We agonized a bit over what he should do, but ultimately settled on saying that he really needs to hear at least a few of the top candidates for himself if these are going to be his forever speakers. We whittled down his list to the KEF Reference series, Ascend Sierra Raw series, and RBH Signature Reference series, saying that's a good representation of some different designs. And he agreed. So he started the process. The first speakers to arrive were the KEF R300. He ordered them from accessories for less, even though they will have a 5% restocking fee if he returns them, and he has to pay for shipping both ways. He also got a pair of Ascend Sierra 2, no restocking fee if he returns those, but he does have to pay shipping both ways. He knows a local RBH dealer who is willing to sell the RBH Signature Reference speakers at a substantial discount, but the dealer would charge a 20% restocking fee if David returns them. So he reached out to RBH, and they said they can sell him a pair of bookshelf speakers directly, but they'd have to charge full retail price. No restocking fee if he returns them directly to RBH, although David would have to pay for shipping both ways. Phew. So he says he has really enjoyed the KEF R300 so far, and that they're a clear improvement over his existing speakers, and he's hearing some things he's never heard before. Wow. But he isn't completely blown away.
Right.
Remember my purple unicorn reference earlier? What if it's a little better? Directly comparing them to the Sierra 2, he thinks the KEF's image a bit better, but the KEFs also sound a bit more in your face. The Sierra 2 seem to have even more high frequency detail, but it can be on the edge of sounding harsh to his ears sometimes. A lot of subjective terminology, but I kind of get what he's saying. So not 100% in love with either of them. And he says that every time he hears a song where he thinks the KEFs sound better than the Ascends, a track or two later, he'll hear a song where he thinks the Ascends sound better than the KEFs, so he can't decide. I just picture the poor guy like A-B switching back and forth. Speaker.
He did give an update today, and he's like, well, he's leaning a bit more towards KEF, but I've got thoughts all over the place right now, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then he's agonizing over the RBH situation. Should he order them directly from RBH with the intention of returning them no matter what? Well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't feel right to him. If he doesn't pick the RBH, obviously they'd be going back, and it doesn't make sense to risk a 20% restocking fee by buying from his local dealer. But if he does pick them, they'd be much less expensive through his local dealer, even after return shipping. Then he's still kind of curious to hear Focal and Legacy speakers, but it's basically something around $150 for round-trip shipping for each pair of bookshelf speakers that he auditions. That adds up fast. So what should a person do when faced with the real cost of finding your forever speakers? And let me tell you, I feel for him. I get it. Living in a smaller city like I do, if I want to hear these speakers, guess what? I can't. I can hear whatever Best Buy has to offer, and that's the end of the story.
And that's the case for a lot of people. A lot of people are saying, either they've got the big box and whatever they've got, and then they've got maybe one dealer that's, 50 miles radius within them, and that's it. That's their whole selection for going somewhere and hearing it in person.
Here's an idea I have. Instead of all these possible restocking fees and shipping costs, what's your nearest big city? Like for me, I could go to Atlanta. I mean, I could probably go to Birmingham for a few things, Birmingham, Alabama, but probably I have to go to Atlanta to get real high-end stuff. But if I was going to buy some forever speakers and I had it narrowed down to a handful of different brands, yes, things sound different in your home, but you can really get a feel for what rings your bell by going to a quality dealer and listening to things you're familiar with. I mean, it's what people used to do. We used to take our CDs to dealers and pop a CD in a CD player and ask, let me hear these, let me hear those. And I would take just a day to go to the nearest big city and listen to stuff.
Probably more than a day. Make yourself a weekend out of it.
Yeah, make a little listening vacation. It might be cheaper than all these round-trip shipping things and restocking fees.
It is tough. I mean, I completely feel for you too. And it goes back to the whole thing of, could you just take someone's advice? I mean, for instance, if we had just said, we think the Kefs are a real good choice, and he went and got them, and he never listened to anything else, he'd probably be pretty happy
He'd probably love them. Yeah.
At the same time, I'm sure he can understand why, because he's been saying himself, he's like, on particular things, he really likes the Ascend Sierra 2. And, those are the speakers that I ended up choosing, although, my fronts, I went with essentially the Horizons, a little bit modified. But, he can comprehend why someone would choose those as their forever speakers. And, could be the case with some other higher end speakers as well, including the RBHs, and they have both, right? RBH has both their regular Signature series speakers, which have a traditional dome tweeter and a aluminum woofer in there, and then they also have their Signature Reference, which goes over to a folded ribbon tweeter and a woofer that has a port plug in it, and that it's a slightly different design, but using the same cabinet, and that throws a wrench into things too. Which one of those do you audition? Because the folded ribbon tweeter adds a different, wrinkle into the situation.
Has a different character of sound, doesn't it?
Has a little bit different character of sound. So yeah, I mean, it's a really tough situation. On top of that, I wanted to mention to him specifically that in my experience, because I went through this searching for my forever speakers, and I'm happy with the decision I made, but I agonized over it as well. And what I found was that if I am just going to a store or even bringing something into my place with the notion that I am going to sit down and critically listen to it and directly A/B compare it with another speaker, that my experience doing that was substantially different from what I ended up doing, which was putting on a pair of speakers, letting them play, and not even critically listening, not even being in the same room necessarily, just having them on and playing all the time. Like as many hours of the day as I'm home, I've got these speakers playing, and just getting kind of used to their sound. And then when the opportunity strikes, I go into the room and I sit down and I have a real dedicated listen to them and then I let them keep playing, but I get back up and go do what I need to do and just let them play and play and play and play. And then switch over to another pair of speakers and do the same thing. And I found my experience doing that was that I ended up noticing some things by their absence. And finding myself wishing for a particular pair of speakers to be my forever speakers, going, you know what? Those are the ones I want. Because when they were just playing all the time, and then when I took them away, I wanted them back. And that's what helped me decide. Now, you can't do that in a store.
Not really, no.
But what you can do is get yourself some real good candidates by going out to the stores. Right. And then you can say, okay, I've whittled it down to 2 or 3 candidates. I bring those in. But unfortunately, he's already almost sort of at that step, right? He's got his 3 candidates, but you bring those in and you do what I did. I mean, it worked for me. I'm not saying it's going to necessarily work for everyone else, but I definitely found when you get to this level of performance, I started noticing things more by their absence than by their presence. Because when I was just trying to focus and being like, what exact difference did I hear in the treble there? What exact difference did I hear in the mid-range there? I started losing the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And the problem is, depending on what speakers you're coming from and how hard you've been focusing on this, you may never be, quote, completely blown away.
You probably never will. And in fact, that can be dangerous because something that blows you away can wind up being something that ends up being fatiguing in a really long listening session, because something that immediately stands out and makes you go, wow, is often not very linear, and that's why it really drew attention to itself.
And don't forget, your room, there may be a speaker that, like those Kefs, where you're going, well, it's close, but it's not perfect. But maybe your room needs a little thing somewhere, a little treatment, maybe a little positioning.
What's the real limiting factor, right? But I mean, these have to work within the room that you have. These are the speakers that are going to keep for a really long time. I don't want you to get something that is still making you question the decision, and it shouldn't be based on, well, if I return these, it's going to cost me $75. Yeah. These are your forever speakers. Don't make the decision on that.
Well, also, I have an issue with the concept of forever electronics. Like,
it's tough.
I understand, like,
things,
it's hard enough to pick a forever home. I mean, like, so I don't really kind of get the idea of a forever speaker. And I say that as someone who has accidentally had really good speakers for 19 years.
Well, let's call it
I didn't mean to have forever
something
speakers.
You definitely don't intend to replace a year from now. That would make sense. Right? So let's call them long term. But okay, the end result. I don't want to confuse David even more, but I will say there were a pair of speakers that started me on this whole journey. They didn't end up being my particular forever speakers, but if they had been, I wouldn't have been disappointed. And those were Focal's Beryllium tweeter speakers. In my case, it was their actual professional monitors. I heard the SM11s, which at the time were the flagship. They don't make those anymore. But they do have ones. Now, these ones, they're like twice the price of the Sierra 2s. They're like $1,500 each, which would be the Solo 6 Berylliums from Focal. No, those are the professional monitors. They have amplifiers built in, so you can kind of console yourself with the price being different. Now, if you want to get a very similar speaker with an even nicer cabinet, I actually think that the Solo 6 BE looked darn nice for professional monitors, because most professional monitors have no care about the aesthetics whatsoever, and at least the Solo 6 BE have a little bit of a aesthetic concern. But if you want essentially their equivalent in a consumer speaker, they are also $3,000 a pair, but without amplifiers built in, and those would be the Electra BE series, the bookshelf speakers from the Electra BE series. So those are the speakers that kind of got me into that mindset. And from what he's described of what he's been hearing, I think they might be very much to your liking, because he wants a lot of detail, but without any harshness to it. And that Beryllium tweeter really delivers that superb delineation and imaging, but without any trace of distortion. And that's exactly what he sounds like he's looking for. He's looking for something that can have the type of power, but in a bookshelf form factor, and the Solo 6s or the Electra BEs do that. Now, these are like $3,000 a pair, but forever speakers, man.
I mean, but I just want people to not make themselves so anxious. You know, I understand the feeling like, I'm spending a lot of money here. I don't want to be missing something. A lot of the questions to this podcast seem to revolve around, I like what I have, but is there something better?
Well, of course.
Or people seem afraid to make what they consider a mistake. Oops, I bought the wrong speaker. And you know what? I mean, worst case scenario, you can sell speakers to someone else used.
Yes,
you lose a little bit of money, but it might not be any worse than all this shipping and restocking fees.
And I mean, of course, the problem, I mean, there's so many speaker options.
Yes.
And there's tons where if you said, these are the ones that just rocked me and I loved them, and they ended up being Paradigms, or they ended up being PSBs, or they ended up being DefTex or something like that. I mean, all these are ones where I'd be like, awesome, because I think those are great speakers too. So it's tough to make a really wrong choice. Again, perfection is the enemy of greatness.
Yes.
Right? So,
yes.
I mean, he seems really quite happy with the Kefs, and if you just stop there, please, I am telling you, you have excellent speakers from the Kef reference series. They're fantastic.
He may already be at his solution.
He might already be there.
He might already be, but if he wants to try the RBH that he can get for a good deal from a local dealer, it may actually, like I just said, you can always resell stuff.
Is there any way that dealer could let you listen to them? Like, even if it's not, not at your place? Is there
surely you could go there and hook them up.
I know. Although, it's the whole taking them out of the box. Maybe he has to pay restocking just to take them out of the box, right?
That's just mean. You know what I miss? I miss a good audio store, especially in my town. I'm in a town of 100,000 people. We've got a Best Buy, but I miss, there used to be a place in town called Kincaid TV Stereo. It was in a little shopping center, and they had those dimly lit rooms with the carpeted walls, and you go listen to this speaker, listen to that speaker. I missed that, and that's how I picked my speaker. In fact, I didn't even have the model I ordered. I just assumed these other Yamahas that I like the sound of and the price of probably means these are going to be great. And I was right. And I've done the thing where you just don't go and listen to a whole bunch of other speakers after that.
Yes. But I would say to David, since you've got the Kefs and you've got the Ascends on hand right now, try the thing I was saying, which is just let them play and play and play, and you might notice by something's absence that you really prefer one over the other.
So I know we've spent a lot of time on David there, but there's a lot of emotion that a lot of people feel that are in this hobby, and so I get it, and I feel for him. But man, don't freak out. Those Kefs are probably where you need to land. Moving on to another question. Romaine T. Romaine has a wide open room, 42 feet by 30 feet for the living room, kitchen, and dining area. Hello. But it's also a high vaulted ceiling open to the second floor and stairway and troposphere. Hardwood floors and mostly bare walls. It literally echoes right now. And I'm looking at his pictures. It's a beautiful room, sparsely decorated. And he has this vaulted ceiling that just seriously arcs up to the top of the Burj Khalifa. I don't know where it ends.
That is a steep slope. Yeah.
Yes. And the picture we have, you can see the little tip of what I guess is either a ceiling fan blade or a solar panel off the ISS. I'm not sure. It's one or the other up there. So it just goes and goes. He's using Golden Ear speakers up front with a Golden Ear Super. Is it a sub or super sub?
It's a super sub. Super.
Okay. I detected a typo.
Yeah, well, it's because I was typing sub next. You know, that B was coming up.
I like calling it a sub or sub. So the Golden Ear Sub or Sub X, at present, his surrounds are a pair of Bose cubes mounted way up high, like everything else in his house, on the partial back wall that creates the ceiling over his kitchen. Okay, so his living room area has this enormous vault going up to the heavens, and then his dining area and his kitchen have more normal height ceilings. His audio is powered by an Integra DRX 4.2 receiver that can be expanded to a full 7.2.4 configuration if desired. And of course, he's got a big L-shaped, super soft look. That couch looks like you could take some serious naps. That is a comfy looking couch. It's enormous. All right, so here come the questions. Acoustics. Is this room just a lost cause? It's never a lost cause. He was thinking he could put some absorption panels, yes, on his front wall above and around his TV. He'd like to put some artwork over the fireplace on the left so that could be a printed panel. And he'd be fine putting a rug in front of his seats, but would that be enough? No. Could he ever do enough to make this a reasonably good space acoustics-wise? Reasonably good? I think so. So just to explain to people again, if you're sitting on his L-shaped couch facing the television, the other part of the L wraps around to your right as you're looking at the TV.
Correct.
His front door and a dining area would be to your right. To your left would be the fireplace. Behind you is the dining room. And then above you is God in heaven at the just going up farther than you can even focus.
At least.
No,
Yes.
like clouds form up there. It must rain in his living room. And then behind him up high are the two little Bose speakers. So my first instinct is, okay, if you're willing to put up some absorption panels, which means you've got spousal approval, I assume, or you're ready for the fight, whatever, and you don't mind the look. I wonder if you could hire, if you have the money for this, could you find an interior decorator and tell them, here's what I need to do. I need to add as much soft, squishy stuff without it looking ridiculous in this space. Here's what absorption panels are from a technical point of view. What can you, a designer, help me do in this space? Because honestly, he has it pretty much not decorated. He's got the couch, and otherwise it's just this beautiful structure of a home, and he's got not much in there. So yeah, my first instinct is add as much gushy, soft, absorptive stuff as possible. Throw rugs everywhere that you can without it looking like you don't want it to look.
Thick drapes over the windows that he does have windows that look like they just have blinds right now.
Heavy drapes, absolutely. Everything you can think of that you don't mind the look of that is soft, squishy, and absorbs sound. That's what you need to do. Rugs will help a lot. The curtains.
Not a lot, but some. Yeah, I mean, this is very similar to, we had a question just last week with a quite similar situation. Hardwood floors, completely open, vaulted ceiling, although not quite as sloped and steep as this one, but similar advice, which is that ideally you would have about 30% of the total surface area in this room being absorptive in some way. You know, if that's rugs and thick drapery in addition to acoustic treatments, that's fine, but we're not worried about your first reflection points right now. We don't have to worry about what's directly behind your head because you got lots of space behind you. We're just worried about trying to reduce that echo because that's just killing you right now. You've got to try and reduce an echo. So it's quite literally absorptive panels anywhere that you can reasonably put absorptive panels. He was saying if he just puts them on his front wall and above the fireplace as a piece of artwork, as a printed panel there, and a rug on the floor, is that enough? No, that is clearly not 30% of the surface area.
It will help, but it's not enough.
It'll help, but it's not enough.
I wonder if Romaine is open to the idea of white acoustic panels on that
or
vaulted
just ones
ceiling.
exactly match the finish of his walls right now. Again, similar to advice to last week, which is you can either get ones that blend right in. I mean, you could easily have some artwork going in that dining room that I'm seeing that's over to the right-hand side. You got a whole blank wall over there. That could easily be artwork there. You could have panels on the ceiling or on these vaulted parts of the walls going up that either blend right in or are accent panels to act as decoration. If you want to hire an interior decorator and help you do that, absolutely. But what we're getting at is you probably can't have too much because the likelihood of you putting too much in here is really, really low. Right. And if it were only the front wall and over the fireplace and a rug, no, that isn't enough. Still do it. It's still better than not doing it.
Absolutely.
But you would need to do more than that to turn this into a reasonable acoustic space. Is it a completely lost cause? No, but it's going to cost something. You know, even if it's only drapes and rugs, those aren't free. So it's going to cost something, and maybe it ends up having to be a project that gets done over time. But it's worth the effort because even just talking to each other in a space that echoes is unpleasant. Yeah,
absolutely. You know what I'm picturing in my mind, if anyone listening has ever been to Graceland where Elvis lived, there's one room where each wall is covered in fabric, like drapery. And just a thought, look up Graceland and look at the room covered in fabric.
I mean, sometimes people do that. They actually just put batting on the wall and then cover the wall in fabric. In one solid color, it looks similar to paint.
Yeah. Those triangular bits above the TV and behind and above the kitchen would be a really good place to put such a thing.
Yeah.
And I think you could make it match. Also, I feel like his speakers are too close together. Is that just me? I feel like I want to spread his speakers apart a little more, his golden ears up front. He already plans to get another pair of golden ear speakers to put on floor stands to the left and right of his sectional couch. So those will be his new surrounds, close to ear level. Could he then repurpose his existing Bose Cubes as Atmos speakers? Technically, sure. Would it be worthwhile at all to add another pair of Bose Cubes high up, and it's going to be high, on his front wall to make a 5.1.4 configuration? Putting any speakers on the steep vaulted ceiling isn't really practical. No kidding, you'd need a Sherpa.
I'm coming back to the same advice again as last week from the similar situation of no. Overall, I don't think it's. I mean, I don't want you to use those Bose Cubes for anything. I want you to burn them in hellfire.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, if they're already up there and you don't want to take them down, and you've got a receiver that does 5.1.2 already, and it's literally not going to cost you anything over what you were already going to spend to get the new surround speakers. Fine, give it a try, but
you know,
don't
right
expect.
Now, his little Bose speakers behiund him are more like surround backs. In a 7.2.
I mean, are they even that?
They're behind him, straight behind him.
I know.
And his mentioning of putting speakers at ear level to either side of the couch sounds a little wrong to me too.
Well, no, I'm more in favor of that.
Level.
I'm more in favor. I don't like what he's got right now to be his surround speakers. I mean, I don't like those speakers full stop, and then they're way up high, and they're in the wrong position. So I am in favor of his plan to have some speaker stands to the left and right and have proper surround speakers. But in this room, I wouldn't worry about Atmos. Don't mount some ugly little Bose Cubes up on your front wall.
No.
If you're going to do it, I would go get some white prime elevation speakers from SVS. Those will at least look nice. They'll blend into the decor. They have the proper angle to angle down at you. And if you want to call those front heights and rear heights, have at it with that. But I wouldn't even recommend it to you. I don't think you need to do Atmos in here.
All right. So first advice, rip the Bose off the walls.
Yeah.
And put up lots and lots and lots of room trim, whatever you can afford to make that whole room soft and squishy. Okay, moving on. Chad B. Chad has been using a pair of commercial subwoofers, the Danley Sound CS30. Now, I wonder how he got a hold of those. They've worked well for him for many years, but now one of them has developed a rattle. It doesn't have to be playing particularly loud, and only one of them rattles. Nothing is visibly wrong from the outside. What should he check? I'm going to say the inside. Could it potentially require an entire driver replacement? It could.
But probably not.
I mean, probably not, but it could.
It could, yes. We can't completely rule it out, but probably not.
Probably not.
So it's probably just a wire that came loose.
Yeah.
That happens super frequently in
Depends
subwoofers.
on the nature of the rattle.
It does.
What
It
do
could
you mean by
be like
rattle?
I had a Polk subwoofer where a screw literally came loose inside,
Yeah.
and it sure rattled around in there.
Oh yeah, I've had all kinds of electronics that had something rattling around, and I just kind of thought, it's not hurting anything.
I mean, the thing is, he doesn't say that it's gone silent on him, so I don't think something like the woofer or the amplifier has literally broken.
No, it hasn't died.
He's saying that at when it's not playing even that loud, something is rattling in there. I'm like, well, something came loose inside.
Something just came loose.
So unscrew the driver, pop it out. On a commercial sub, it's probably even easier than on a consumer sub, but I'm sure that there's some way, either through the driver or through the amplifier on the back. You're going to unscrew that, have a look inside. I'm betting you something has simply shaken loose. Oftentimes, there's like a little plastic cover that they put over where the speaker wire attaches, and that comes off and starts rattling inside. There can be really simple reasons why it's happening. Now, if you're talking more about every time the woofer moves, it makes a ka-kunk type of sound, which I wouldn't describe as a rattle, but if it's that type of thing, I mean, that can be multiple different things. That can be a magnet that's become misaligned. That can be at some point the thing jumped to the magnetic gap and now the voice coil is misaligned. It can be that the surround on the woofer has come loose, although he's inspected the outside and it's not that. But that doesn't make a rattle sound. That makes
more
a
of a
clunk sound.
Flappy, ploppy, clunky sound. Yeah.
So I'm betting something literally just came loose inside.
Yeah,
And if
so
you
that's probably-
peek inside, you can probably find it.
Probably completely fixable. With one of his Danley subs acting up, it's got him thinking about a potential subwoofer upgrade. While the Danley subs can play extremely loud, and that's what they're built for, they're rated at -3 dB at 33 hertz. And they truly do not play below 25 hertz in his home. His room is wide open, so he's dealing with 28,000 cubic feet.
Yeah.
He looked at SVS, but for this kind of output, we've often mentioned Power Sound Audio, so he contacted them. They suggested either a pair of their V1811 single ported 18-inch, 2,750 for a pair, or a pair of their S3010, which are dual 15-inch sealed, 3,100 to 3,500 for a pair, depending on finish. They put it in terms of what kind of extension he would prefer. And I assume he means by that, how low can it go?
Yeah.
What would we recommend? Either is certainly less expensive than dual SVS PB16 Ultras, but are there any other subs he should consider instead of these Power Sound Audio options? So, I mean, first things first, I think you're going to enjoy a home theater experience with something that's not these commercial subs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
think
they're
so.
not playing much below 30 hertz at all, so
No.
he's missing a good half of an octave of some of the
Yeah, these are meant for, small concerts. They're meant to give you the brown note. They're meant to vibrate your chest. They're meant to punch.
Yeah, and
crowds.
it's really rare that any musical instrument is playing anything below 30 hertz, so they're perfectly matched for that. But
This
for
is
the
a
low frequency effects.
This is for kick drums in clubs.
Sure.
And that's fine. And so,
Absolutely.
but my other thing is that if he switches to what we would consider home theater subs, like Power Sound Audio, you may at first feel like you're missing something because you're going to get flat response. And I guarantee you those Danleys don't have flat response. So you're going to go, hey, where did the kick in the chest go? Or these things don't play very well, but it would be far more accurate, I think.
Playing those sweeps, convince yourself with the sweeps. Come back to that. I mean, this room size, my first thought goes to JTR and their Captivator subs. Those are 18-inch drivers that they use in the JTR Captivators, but they start, their smallest sub that they sell starts at $1,800 each. So you'd be looking at, $3,600 there for a pair of them, which is more expensive than either of the Power Sound Audio options. And it's basically equivalent to that V1811. So there's not much reason to not go for the Power Sound Audio V1811. Now, in your room size, I'm like, sealed subs, even when they're dual 15 inchers? No, man, you're going ported in here. If you can physically fit it, you're going ported. That is absolutely the way I would tell you to go. I'm not worried about, it starts to roll off higher and it's got a gradual roll off, so there is technically still output happening at 10 hertz. I don't care. I want good output at 20 hertz.
Right.
You're getting the 18-inch ported one. The V1811 is a fantastic choice. You're not going to find a better price than that. Rhythmic's equivalent would be their FV18. Very similar, but
still more expensive.
$1,700 each, so $3,400 for a pair of those. Still more expensive than the pair of V1811. So that's what you're getting.
I'm thinking those Power Sound Audios with the 18-inch driver.
Yeah.
It just sounds like the thing. I think
it ticks all the boxes, man.
I'm certain it would be more accurate. Would he like it more? I think probably eventually he would. I bet at first he'd have that feeling like I felt the first time I actually did some equalization, some
Right.
automatic.
Actually got linear.
Actually got linear. I went, well, where'd the boomity go? And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, that sounds realistic, and it's booming when it's supposed to.
Also masking things before, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He goes on to ask, the Power Sound Audio website lists compression graphs as well as CTA 2010 output charts, and they seem to have different values. Can we please explain the difference?
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the CTA 2010 graphs. So these are bursts. These are bursts of, you can't really call it pink noise because they're only containing the frequencies that are shown.
Right.
But it's similar to pink noise where it's all the frequencies jumbled together at once and they play it in a big old burst and see how loud it can get without going over the specified distortion limit that CTA has set out in those specifications. But it's a very short little burst. Now, it can be referenced to either the microphone being 1 meter away or the microphone being 2 meters away, which, of course, the numbers, the decibel level will be higher if you reference it to 1 meter away, and it appears that Power Sound Audio is referencing it to 1 meter away. They're supposed to state that, but that's what it looks like going by some other independent measurements and comparing them to Power Sound Audio's listed measurements. So it looks like they're referencing that to 1 meter away. It's a burst. Now, when they're talking about the compression graphs, you'll notice, so let's just take, for example, in the 31 to 50 hertz range from the CTA burst, they're like, this thing can hit 129.5 decibels, all right?
Yeah.
Now, if you look at the compression and you're looking in this range up to 50 hertz, you're seeing that the highest line in here is at about 116, 117, something like that?
Yeah.
Basically about 12 decibels short of the burst. Well, that makes perfect sense because the compression graph is a sustained output. It is a sweep and not just a burst. It's not a full, like what you would measure the RMS power output to be where it's continuous, but it is a sustained sound played as a sweep, and they just keep increasing the volume until the thing just doesn't play any louder. So that on its own, you're expecting to have 6 decibels of extra headroom for a short transient burst. And then, if this is referenced to 2 meters away instead of 1 meters away, there's your other 6 decibels. So having a difference of the maximum output in this compression graph being about 12 decibels lower than the specified CTA burst output makes perfect sense. Those numbers line up perfectly. If one of them is referenced to 2 meters, the other one referenced to 1 meter, that's 6 decibels of difference. And then you would expect another 6 decibels of difference for one being a burst and the other one being a sweep.
And those bursts are much more telling when it comes to movies and things exploding.
That's your gunshot. That's your drum kick.
Yeah.
The ring that comes after any of those sounds is much quieter than the transient boom at the beginning.
Right. All right. Moving on finally to new questions as we start.
We get talking.
Okay, let's see what happens. New for this week. Let's see if we can get through some of these. Teemu H. Teemu has a 65-inch B7 LG OLED and a 7.1.2 audio system. He loves his picture and sound, but he's trying to optimize his HDR viewing experience. The B7 offers LG's Active HDR tone mapping that ignores the metadata and just analyzes the movie frame by frame. But Teemu thinks it's a little too aggressive and that it tends to brighten some shadows too much. So for most content, which he assumes is mastered at 1,000 nits, he prefers to keep the LG Active HDR turned off. But then some HDR content ends up looking much too dark. He assumes those are the 4,000 nit masters, or the discs that just have the metadata zeroed out. He can't find a happy medium with those discs. So, is a Panasonic Ultra HD Blu-ray player with Panasonic's HDR optimizer the solution? Would the $500 UB820 be worth it in his case? So, I have the newer one. I have the B8.
You have the B or C8?
I got the B8
C8 or B8?
I got a B8.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a B8. And I agree that like when I I haven't watched any HDR off of a disc. I don't have an Ultra. I've watched Prime. I've watched Netflix. I've watched a lot of YouTube HDR.
Okay. So all of that stuff is mastered to 1,000 nits.
Yeah. So I have been able to find a setting I like because on mine, and I don't know if it's true on his one model before, my HDR setting is remembered separately.
Yep.
from non-HDR settings. So I'm only getting one flavor of HDR, I reckon,
Yeah.
one level of nits. And when I got it like I wanted it, which when I first saw it, it was crazy. Like, it was too much. It looked unrealistic. The whole point of HDR is to simulate reality, in my opinion, right? And so I actually brought down the overall contrast and the OLED level. I brought up the brightness just a touch. And I brought the saturation of color down.
And in yours on the B8, there's a separate line item when you can turn on, what do they call it? Dynamic.
I can't remember.
There's a separate line item because in the 7, in the B7, or was it B7 or C7 that he has? Regardless, the one with the 7 in it, that one you have to turn on the dynamic contrast setting to low. That's what activates the active HDR. It's a separate little line item that you can toggle on and off in the B8. So I don't know if you've given that a try, because that's the one where they just ignore the metadata and they just analyze it, the histogram frame by frame.
I'm really happy with it at the moment.
There you
so
go,
I guess I got it right. Don't touch it. That's my theory with my TV.
Given Teemu's explanation of what he knows, it sounds like he knows what he's doing. This isn't someone who's just like, I completely have no idea what's going on. It sounds like he knows what he's doing, and he knows what he likes. And in your case, Teemu, I will say I do think one of Panasonic's players would be worth it to you. You might end up finding that you still end up doing a considerable amount of fiddling, because the way the HDMI optimizer works is that it does read the metadata off of the disc and then adjusts its tone mapping based on that. Now, what the Panasonic does is that it will always output the exact same metadata to the LG. So as far as the LG is concerned, every piece of HDR content is mastered to whatever nit level you choose to come out of the Panasonic.
Can you literally say 500 nits?
One of the options is for a projector, so that'll be at 500 nits, and then it'll be 1,000 nits, 1,500, or sort of limitless.
Because these TVs are basically 500. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you could use that, or you could use the 1000 setting, because he says he can get the 1000 looking nice.
Okay.
It's the stuff that's mastered higher than that. So you can set the Panasonic to always output 1000 nits.
Okay.
You've got the LG set up a way that works nicely with 1000 nit master content. Now the question is, what is the Panasonic doing to any content that's mastered on the disc itself? More than 1000 nits to bring it down to 1000 nits. That you can adjust
in the player
manually a little bit, and because it is reading the metadata on those discs where it's zeroed out or it's been mastered to 10,000 or something like that, you might have to adjust specifically for that disc. But the thing is, you can and you can't on your LG. So given what Teemu has described, I do think it's worth it. Should he go for the UB820? Well, it depends on whether the UB450, which is the newest model, is available in your area, because it's less expensive, and it still does on the video side all the things that the UB820 does, including Dolby Vision, which your LG OLED can do, so it would be nice to have that support as well. So look for the UB450. But if you cannot find it anywhere because it hasn't been released in North America yet, and I'm not sure if Teemu is in North America or somewhere else, if you're in Europe, you should be able to find the UB450. But you know what? If the 820 is there and you're willing to spend the $500, I think it'd be worth it to you.
Makes sense. That actually sounds like a good match that he'll probably be happy with.
Yeah.
Another question. Lieutenant Commander Byron S. Thank you for your service. Byron says he is on deployment number 5, and AVRant has kept him company on every single one of them since he downloads a bunch of episodes whenever he's in port. Oh, man, see, I feel extra pressure to be entertaining for Byron now.
Too late now. We're 3/4 of the way through this.
No, I better tighten up here and be more interesting. Ever since he read about RBH Signature Reference series speakers over at Audioholics, he's always dreamed of them one day being his speakers. See, we've got another almost forever speaker kind of guy. It's been over 10 years since that dream was born, and they've gone through the SX versions and onto the SV versions now, but he's always kept them in mind. He currently owns SVS Ultra series speakers, and of course, he's heard Rob speak very highly of the Ascend Sierra Raw speakers, so he basically wants to know if the RBH Signature Reference speakers are still worth it, whether they should remain his dream speakers, or if there's something else that would be a better choice to replace his SVS Ultra speakers. For price comparison's sake, the SVS Ultra bookshelves are $1,000 a pair, while the Ascend Sierra 2s are $1,500 a pair, and the RBH SV61Rs come in at $1,900 a pair. The price differences are even bigger for the tower models, $2,000 a pair for SVS Ultras, $2,700 a pair for Ascend Sierra Raw towers, and $4,400 per pair for the RBH SV6500R. Is there anything about the RBH speakers other than looks that should make him keep that 10-year-old RBH dream alive? I understand about dreams, man. I do. I remember when I was a teenager, I fell in love with my friend's Alpine car stereo. And to this day, I'm kind of like, even though they're not like a high-end brand anymore in the car stereo world, not really, I'm still like, it's just that pretty green button. I still kind of, nostalgia.
So once again, I'm going to mention how there are these two lines in the Signature series. You got the RBH Signature series and the RBH Signature Reference series. And the Signature series uses that traditional dome and traditional woofer, and we think extremely highly of those. And what I want to say about the RBH Signature series speakers is one of the reasons Tom and I both like them so much is that we basically say if these are your speakers and you don't like what you're hearing, your speakers are not to blame.
Yeah,
That's sort of
those
the
aren't
attitude
bad
we take.
speakers.
Because they are so linear.
Yeah.
And they're such a benign load that it's almost impossible for the combination of your particular amplifier and those speakers to be causing non-linearities. They're just a tell it like it is speaker. And that's why we like them so much and so frequently recommend RBH, because they're almost like a tool. It's like saying, this is removing a variable from my system.
Yeah.
It's not the speakers.
If it doesn't sound good on these, something else is broken.
That's right. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be your favorite.
Right.
Because with the Signature Reference series and going to this folded ribbon tweeter and this other woofer that they're using in that, it's almost like, well, this is almost adding a little bit of character to it. You don't have the completely even dispersion that the regular Signature series has. It's a little bit more beamy. It's got a little bit more of this, a little touch less that. It's almost their attempt at a character speaker. And that may or may not be, to your preference. You're starting with SVS Ultra series speakers.
Yeah.
Those are really good speakers. Those are really neutral. Those are really linear speakers. Going to something that's going to make you say, oh, this was worth every penny, that's going to be tough. I'm not saying there's nothing that you're not going to prefer over them. You could easily prefer something over them, but it might be something like a Magnapan or a Martin Logan electrostatic speaker, something that's decidedly different. It might be a Golden Ear speaker that definitely has a character to its sound, but you just happen to really, really like it. It's tough for me to say that I think you should absolutely get the Signature Reference series from RBH because they might not even be to your particular liking.
I mean, you need to listen to them first.
You definitely got to listen to it. I mean, again, I could mention like Focal Electra BE. These are $3,000 a pair, although that's not tremendously off, the path of where the Signature Reference series would be. And, that might be something that's to your liking even more, but you're getting into that sort of price range. Again, Legacy Audio is going to come up again. Dyne Audio is going to come up again. These Revel, these companies are going to come up, and when you get into the really high price ranges, you're almost paying for character instead of lack of character.
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough difference between the traditional Signature series, the non-reference RBH Signature series, and your SVS Ultras that I'd be like, oh, you gotta pay $1,200 instead of the $1,000 that you paid for the SVS Ultras. It's tough for me to say that this should be your dream and never consider anything else. I think you're already at speakers that are so good. Another point I want to make is your room is going to be more of a limiting factor than your speakers at this point, potentially. So maybe put all the money you were going to put into new speakers into dedicating and treating your room. That could make the bigger difference than a speaker change at this point.
But I feel bad killing Byron's dream. I know what it feels like to have that, like, because what I'm curious about is what did he read that suddenly made those in his mind the dream speakers? Because he says ever since he read about them, he didn't say he heard them.
Yeah, and this was from Gene and Tom and Clint and everyone else over at Audioholics who they exactly what I said. It's what gets us excited about it, ironically, is that it's like you've removed something. You've removed a variable. That's what actually got us excited, because when you're talking about trying to make recommendations, we're almost looking for, we know if you get this, it's not going to be the problem. And that makes us excited. That isn't necessarily what a consumer is looking for.
Right.
So Yeah, it's tough for me to say that. I mean, you know what? If psychologically you're just like, if I get these, I'm going to be happy. And there's no way I'm going to tell you got bad speakers. You're getting super good speakers.
Oh, they'll be very good, yeah. So,
to if psychologically it just makes you happy, then that's worth it.
I mean, go find a way to listen to them before you buy them, just to make sure there's not some character of sound that you go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm not into that.
Because otherwise you've got something that's already darn close to.
Yeah. But I say it's okay to keep the dream alive. Just make sure you're being realistic that it may not be
for the right
everything
reasons.
you want. Right. Go listen to them. So, yeah. and then there's some other ideas. Shall we move on to Kris?
Let's shall.
All right, Kris P. Kris heard somewhere that while Audyssey obviously sets distances and trim levels for overhead speakers, top fronts, top rears, etc., it doesn't actually apply any EQ. Is that true?
No.
Okay.
It is flatly not true. In
so
fact,
wherever you heard that is wrong.
In fact, it was one of the issues that came for some of us crazy folks who have contemplated the idea of using multiple AV receivers to expand to say 9.1.6 without going for one of the $4,000 or up processors.
Right.
You actually had to set those to output the pre-outs of say your top fronts and top rears without any equalization applied, because otherwise using a separate AV receiver with say Dolby Pro Logic to extract a top middle, because you're going to feed them out as though they are the left and the right. The top front and the top rear become the inputs of your left and right, and it extracts a center out of those using like Dolby Pro Logic. That doesn't work if you just let Audyssey run and then output the pre-outs, because it's applied different EQs to the top fronts and the top rears. So we know for sure it is applying EQ to those channels.
There you go. Perhaps the question about whether or not Audyssey applies EQ to overhead speakers comes from the confusing discussion about Atmos speakers. Sometimes people online are talking about overhead speakers that are actually on or in the ceiling, and they call those Atmos speakers. But sometimes people are talking about upward firing speakers and calling those Atmos speakers. Well, they're all Atmos speakers, technically. Kris noticed that Onkyo introduced a new EQ feature they call Reflex that is specifically for upward firing speakers, and it allows for more adjustments. Do we know anything about what's going on there or how Audyssey compares?
Right. So when it comes to the upward firing modules, right, or Atmos-enabled speakers that have built-in upward firing drivers, there is a significant difference there, because Dolby developed their own specific EQ curve that is meant to mimic the head-related transfer function that tells our brain that sound came from above me instead of in front of me or beside me. And so if you start messing with that equalization curve that Dolby developed, you're going to have an issue. That effect isn't going to work nearly as well anymore. What Onkyo is attempting to do with the AQ Reflex is so Tom and I don't actually truly believe that the sound is really bouncing off of the ceiling. I mean, it's being fired up there, and it is a fairly directional high frequency, so there is some reflection effect.
I can promise you, if it's drywall up there and you aim high frequencies at it, something's bouncing off that ceiling.
Absolutely, just like you're getting a reflection off your sidewall, your first reflection at, but it's that kind of reflection, like just like your first reflection off of your sidewall is. It's that type of reflection, which is much less powerful than the direct sound, and it does more of a smearing than it does. Like, how often do you listen to your front left or right speaker and go, oh, well, that sound originated from my left wall? Because you have a first reflection.
Right.
That doesn't really happen.
Well, however, if you completely block the direct sound, you would hear stuff bouncing off the wall.
But you don't completely block the direct sound from upward firing.
I think we've had a similar conversation where I've asked, like, wouldn't you want an upward firing speaker to be very directional, like with the tweeter?
So that's why I believe most of the effect is coming from that EQ curve that Dolby developed to mimic the head-related transfer function, which, like Sony's Atmos sound bars, they don't have any upward firing drivers. They just apply equalization to the sounds that are meant to make you think they came from overhead. So Tom and I both believe quite strongly that most of the effect is coming from the equalization curve that's mimicking the head-related transfer function. But what Onkyo is trying to do with AQ Reflex is they gate the response of some of their measurements to only measure extremely high frequencies. And they're using that to set the distance setting for your upward firing. So they're saying, okay, we're basically gating these really high directional frequencies to try and get a better read of not the distance that went, directly from the upward firing driver forward to your microphone, but that went up to the ceiling and bounced down.
So they're trying to do something accurate with those reflections I keep talking about. Yeah.
That's right. So does that super duper work? It's really questionable because you aren't getting only those super high frequencies. You're getting frequencies down to at least 200 hertz from Atmos, any Atmos speakers, upward firing modules included. You're getting sounds down to at least 200 hertz, which is bass. That's not directional like that. So if you're setting the distance setting based only on the really high frequencies that maybe are reflecting off of the ceiling, is that going to give you better accuracy than just playing a regular pink noise test tone and setting the distance that way? That's super questionable, and you can always change it manually anyway. And also, these are Atmos effects where does it really matter if the phase perfectly lines up?
How much information goes up there anyway? It's a few
all
helicopters.
Of that is super questionable to me. So
I swear it's just the occasional helicopter in an adventure movie. That's really all anybody
But as far as saying, is the EQ like Audyssey's equalization maybe not being applied to quote unquote Atmos speakers? If it's the upward firing ones, that is true, because if they linearized the response, you've lost Dolby's equalization. So that is the case. They are most likely talking about the upward firing modules or Dolby Atmos-enabled upward firing speakers when they're saying no EQ is being applied by something like Audyssey. That is true.
They don't really go up entirely is what we're getting at. If they had like a big tube that aimed it up, maybe. Speaking of Onkyo, Kris is trying to plan his next receiver upgrade, and he keeps coming back to Onkyo rather than Denon, Marantz, or Yamaha. He has an Onkyo receiver right now, and for him, having Chromecast built in is a killer feature. I can see that. Furthermore, while he agrees that the first stab at Active EQ was pretty bad, Onkyo has steadily improved upon it. Now they're up to Active EQ Advance with multiple microphone positions and the ability to store 2 or 3 memory slots so that you can very quickly switch between different configurations. Onkyo also seems to have gone the route of trying to support as many wireless whole house audio formats as possible with DTS Play-Fi, Flare Connect, and their own Onkyo controller app, Sonos, all versions of Apple AirPlay, and as mentioned, Chromecast built in. Denon, Marantz, and Yamaha chose to work with Amazon's voice assistant, and Onkyo works with the Google Assistant. So, looking at all the features and given his existing familiarity with Onkyo, does it make sense for him to try and conform with our usual Denon, Marantz, or Yamaha advice? No, you ain't got to do that. You can buy what you want to. Sure you're making very good arguments for why you should get an Onkyo. Or is he right to think that sticking with Onkyo makes more sense in his case? Yes. And if it's right for him, shouldn't we recommend Onkyo to other people more often too? Well, it's hard to recommend every single thing that might be good, and other people
and
don't.
I have recommended Onkyo quite, especially that 787, because it can do 5.2.4 for under $500 now, and nothing else really can. So on the topic of the whole house audio in particular, because that's an easy one to explain, the reason I'm so bullish on Yamaha is because MusicCast from Yamaha does something that no other wireless whole house audio system does, which is allow you to continue playing surround sound or full immersive audio in your home theater while replicating that same sound in stereo in other rooms wirelessly.
There you go.
No other wireless system lets you do that. All other wireless systems, whole house audio, if you want to continue playing sound in your main room and duplicate that sound in other rooms, every room, including your main room, has to be stereo, not surround sound or immersive audio. So that's the killer thing to me that makes me always go, you want to do whole house audio and you haven't installed something already? Go MusicCast, because it's unique. So that's where that comes from. Then on the Denon Marantz side, Tom and I are fans of Audyssey. Like Active EQ, I applaud that they have continued to improve it. It is not as bad as when it first came out and it was a single measurement point and really didn't work. It's better now, but it's still not fur filters because they just didn't bother with the processing power to do fur filters. Yamaha is using fur filters now. They didn't used to before. So they're still using infinite impulse response filters. Now that's not bad. That's what Anthem uses, and Anthem's really good. Anthem room correction, and they use infinite impulse response filters. So Onkyo's doing something that is technically on that side more similar to Anthem's room correction, which can be really good. And yes, now that they're doing multiple measurement points, I'm not nearly as against it as I used to be. So all of that's good. Yeah, Onkyo could definitely be the solution for a lot of people. It depends, right? If somebody comes in and says, I want to do whole house audio and I want to keep surround sound, I'm going to be pointing you to Yamaha. If someone says, I want, the other thing is Onkyo doesn't have something akin to dynamic EQ or YPOW volume other than in the THX listening modes and using THX loudness plus. But then you can't do immersive audio because THX doesn't have an immersive audio listening mode.
Trade-offs.
So there's always, everything is going to be a trade-off. In your case, you've identified a few key features that Onkyo offers that the others don't.
That he loves.
That he likes and he uses and he wants to continue having. Yeah, you're giving up very little these days by going with any of these brands, and I'm really happy that Onkyo and Yamaha have started to step up their game, because it was a few years there where we're like, Denon Marantz are just killing them. They're killing them on price and features, and the other guys aren't matching them. Yamaha and Onkyo finally started to step up and are starting to match them, and that's why you're hearing more Yamaha recommendations coming out of me, especially being able to use now on their newest receivers, being able to use MusicCast to create wireless surround speakers, which is something we've wished normal AV receivers would do for years and years. I'm like, you start putting features like that in, we're going to start recommending you. So
yeah, I've still got my finger hovering over the mouse button on accessories for less on that Yamaha A1060. It's only they're selling it for $600.
Do you want wireless surrounds that
I
are
don't need
MusicCast
wireless
speakers?
surrounds. No.
Oh, well, then you don't have to go for the 1080.
No, I do not. I think it matches what I want perfectly. It has the two separate HDMI. I think it has two separate. It looks like from the manual it describes sending two separate signals to two different HDMI outputs, and it's got all the power I want. I think that's a perfect match.
I think a lot of people want consensus, right? They want to hear, here's what worked for me, so that's what I'm going to recommend to everybody else. I'm like, it's case by case.
Right. It's frustrating that we can't just say, here is the best thing.
That's right.
And we also don't always have time to say, here are the 11,000 acceptable things. So it doesn't mean we're hating on Onkyo. It's just in this case,
Definitely not.
He found the perfect thing. Go for it. Infinite Gary, who writes a question every time I'm on this podcast.
I had to put it in there.
Gary was reading about the new 2019 Panasonic OLED TV models. They are touting their new HCX Pro processor, and one of the features they mention is a Dynamic LUT. That's a lookup table that adjusts on a scene-by-scene basis to ensure optimal color accuracy, they say. Gary is confused by this. If a TV has been professionally calibrated, isn't it showing accurate colors no matter what signal is thrown at it? What would this Dynamic LUT be offering? That's a good question. Seems to me it's just a different interpretation of how to maybe change the color space or something. I don't know what it could be.
So to explain what a lookup table is, the technical description, definition of what a lookup table is for is to convert one color space into another color space. Now, why would you need to do that with a television? Well, the television will have some native color that it outputs. This is the exact range of colors that are produced by the individual red, green, and blue subpixels, and these are the number of controllable steps based on the electrical signal that we are able to modulate the output of each of those red, green, and blue subpixels, so that creates the native color palette that the TV is capable of producing.
Right.
And then into that, we feed, say, Rec 709 from a Blu-ray, or we might feed Rec 2020 into it from an Ultra HD Blu-ray, or it might be some other color format. Maybe you've connected a PC to your television, so it's a different color format, sRGB or Adobe RGB or something like that. So something inside of that TV has to take that color signal information and turn it into something that the native capability of the television understands. It says, this is the color that was requested by the signal. What electrical signal do I actually have to send to each red, green, and blue subpixel to produce that color accurately?
Or to get as close as I can.
Yeah.
Right. So all they're doing is bragging about how they've tuned the input to the pixels on the screen.
But what makes it a dynamic LUT instead of a static LUT? That's what Gary would like to know. What's the difference here? So a lookup table, right? A lookup table is quite a simple translation. It's a chart. It says, here's the signal that came from the piece of content. Here's the what calculation I have to apply to it to turn it into the signal I'm going to feed to each subpixel. So it's just it's that piece in between. It's the translator. That's what your lookup table is. Now, if we go to something like LG's 2018 OLEDs, like yours, now the ones that had the Alpha 9 processor, they had a 33 by 33 by 33 lookup table. So they had 33 values for green, 33 values for red, 33 values for blue.
But I'm cheap, so mine doesn't have that.
You went with the B8, and it has a 17 by 17 by 17 lookup table. Now, that's the adjustable lookup table. There's, of course, a hard fixed lookup table inside the TV that you can't adjust, but these are the adjustable lookup tables. Well, you're saying, okay, 33 by 33 by 33, that's over 30,000 combinations. That seems like a lot of precision that we can get, except that in a 10-bit signal, it's 1024 by 1024 by 1024.
Yeah. That's a lot
That's
more.
That's how many values there actually are in a 10-bit signal. And we're saying we've got an adjustable 33 by 33 by 33 grid. So what Panasonic is saying is, I don't know how many points they have in their user adjustable lookup table. I don't know if it's 30 by 30 by 30 or some number smaller than that. It's probably not larger because consumer TVs just don't have lookup tables, adjustable lookup tables larger than that. But they're saying we can move that lookup table up and down the grayscale to give us more finer gradation. Because if all you're sending us is a whole bunch of bright, well, why don't we use all the values in our lookup table only on bright values?
So this might maybe reduce some of the inherent banding.
It might reduce some of the little bit of banding. It hopefully means that you'll have really, really accurate colors in the dark shadows and really, really accurate colors in the super bright scenes as well.
Okay,
instead of some of them being a little bit off because you have to spread these values across all of them. But if you have a scene that contains both dark and super bright at the same time, you have to spread out your lookup table across all of those values.
Get it. Yeah,
but they're saying dynamically we can shift it around to give us finer gradation. That's all they're doing.
I see. Actually, that actually makes sense. So if you're looking at a very dark scene with lots of subtle dark grays,
dark browns and greens and stuff,
right.
Yeah, keep that all highly saturated.
Gotcha. Okay, so Gary had a pair of self-powered Dynaudio 110A speakers in one of his rooms, and a pair of self-powered Dynaudio 20XD speakers in a different room. He was used to hearing them in their respective rooms and had them dialed into his liking. And then he decided to mess with it. He decided to directly A/B compare them. It must be like a cat just jumping out of one room and running into the other. Like, I have an idea. Let's change everything around. Gary must be fun to live with these electronics. He decided to directly compare them. So he took the 110As into the room where he had the 20XDs. He heard a difference in the treble between the two of them. So he adjusted the treble response of the 110As until it was to his liking, figuring it was all due to room differences and placement. Am I correct? These speakers have an adjustment on the back.
They do, because they are self-powered, so you are able to adjust the high-frequency trim level on the speaker
It's not a crazy amount of adjustment range.
It's usually plus or minus 3. That's
okay, yeah. But when he took the 110As back to their room and set everything back the way it used to be, now the treble sounded different to him. And he wound up adjusting their treble the same way he had them in the 20XD's room. Seems weird to him, so what might explain this difference? I'm going to say human sensory input explains this difference. Yeah, it's the gray stuff between your ears, Gary. And that's okay. It's just you caused yourself to notice a difference. You liked it different the other way, and so you changed it. That's what happened.
Yeah, this is a perceptual difference. I mean, honestly, even if you objectively measured it, the difference is probably exceedingly small. But yeah, there's the idea of the null hypothesis, right? Which can never be proven. You can never prove that there is no difference between two things. You can only disprove the null hypothesis and say that we have, in fact, found a difference. But we tend to think the opposite direction. We tend to think, I believe there is a difference. Prove to me there isn't. That tends to be the way humans think.
You sit behind that table in the meme that says, change my mind. You're the guy behind the change my mind table. Yeah.
So once you have it in mind that there's an audible difference, it's really hard to prove that there isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, that's 100% true. I've moved speakers from one room to another and went, ooh.
Yeah.
This doesn't sound that good.
And then when you move them back, you're like, oh, they don't sound as good as they used to.
Yeah. Did I shake loose some delicious sound quality while I moved it?
What just happened? Got it in your head that that's the way it is now. No, it's purely psychological, Gary.
Yeah. So congratulations, you're a human being, Gary.
Yeah.
And that's how we work, and it's frustrating. And all of science is trying to fight against all these craziness things that happen in our brain.
Do it all blind, Gary. Do it all blind.
There you go. Mitch R. Mitch Mitch is back after our discussion last week to further clarify his situation. He was asking about potentially upgrading his front 3 B&W 600 series speakers, and the only options he'd listened to at a local dealer were the 700 series B&Ws and the Revel Performa 3 series. He liked both, but not enough to buy either on the spot. He'd end up leaning B&W again if they were the only two options. So we gave him a whole bunch of other brands to consider, but unfortunately, that wasn't really what he was asking. The local dealer with the B&W and Revel speakers is the only one in his area. Again, we feel you. That's just how it is most of the time. So auditioning a ton of other brands isn't easy for Mitch. Take that weekend vacation like we were talking about to a big city. We said we weren't. You could go to Chicago, and what was the fellow's name that is making? Was it Brian? No,
it was Jeremy Porter.
Jeremy. Yeah. So whoever's making those speakers, go to Chicago this weekend and listen to a bunch of speakers in fancy stores.
Oh, there'll be a lot of speakers at Expona.
There you go. And that's how you do it. Anyway, we said we weren't sure what his room was like. So he reminded us that he's the guy with the, quote, nice vacuum lines on his carpet, and resent a couple of photos. And yes, again, the OCD side of me looks at that carpet going, that is some nice vacuum lines.
That's right.
That looks
lines in the lawn being mowed as well.
Like I would totally sit on that carpet and just run my fingers through it. It looks fantastic. Excellent. So he was hoping that with our experience, we might be able to tell him which speakers he might like even more than the B&W 700 series. He can't audition all of the brands we mentioned, so this is more about relying on our advice to bring in an upgrade that will make him happy. What do we say? What compares to what he has said he likes?
Yes, indeed. So, my goodness, are we going to be a broken record, right? Yeah. Because, I mean, it just happens to be the theme this week, and we happen to have 3 fairly similar questions, and it's going to be end up being 3 fairly similar responses. Again, this is not a 100% dedicated listening room, right? We can see that at the back there. It's clearly open to a kitchen area. There's stairs, perhaps going upstairs in the back there as well. So this is not a completely dedicated room. I would strongly suspect that the limiting factor, once you have speakers as good as you already have, is more the room than the speakers themselves. So, is this a question of I am trying to remove a variable from my system and know that the speakers are not to blame, in which case, hey, well, I'm going to say RBH again.
RBH again.
Right? Which we mentioned before, but he's trying to whittle down his choices. But I mean, we're going to find it hard to not mention RBH in most situations because of exactly that. If what you want to do is say, well, I know the speakers aren't the problem, so let's figure out something else.
We should convince RBH to change the name of that speaker to the Null hypothesis speaker.
Right, yeah.
That sounds good to me.
But, I'm going to come back to similar recommendations again. Focal Electra BE series, if you want to hear what set me off on my journey, but $3,000 a pair you're looking at. These are not inexpensive, although I know he has the price range where he could consider those. So could I stop at those 2? I could. Or I can end up repeating the list that we gave last time, because Kef's going to be in there again. Ascend is going to be in there again. Dynaudio is going to be in there again. Legacy is going to be in there again. But I think if you want me to whittle it down for you, bring in the RBH Signature Series speakers, not even necessarily the Signature Reference, the Signature Series speakers, which I think are even less expensive than the speakers you already have.
The Null hypothesis speaker.
But give those a good try, because if in your room you say, I really don't like these, at least right, from having listened to those, that you actually are looking for something with some kind of character to it. He likes B&W speakers. They have a character, and they make no bones about it, and that's
Can you describe their character in any way that is
Well, of course,
close
the
to
word
objective?
they always say is warm, but essentially they have a slight mid-range rise in them.
Okay.
Which can be very, very pleasing.
Right.
So.
It's hard to know what people mean by warm. I think my speakers in my living room, I kind of call them warm.
Sure.
They have delicate highs, but nothing's really blasting you in the face. It's very easy to listen to. I never get fatigued. So
I can understand the description, like going back where we say the Sierra 2s could occasionally sound harsh. That's not my experience of them, but they have exceedingly extended highs, which means that if your ears just react to, 15 kilohertz or something, and you find that unpleasant, that's coming out of those with nothing being filtered out of them, out of the Sierra 2s. I happen to really like that, so they're for me. not necessarily going to be for everybody. So, yeah, I'm going to point you to RBH again, and I'm going to point you, since I know you can afford them, to the Focal Electra BE series. But you know what? If you get a listen to those and you're like, I still like the B&W 700 series, nothing wrong with that, man.
No, man, that's a good speaker.
Yeah.
Don't chase that purple unicorn. It's okay. You have good speakers. Let's move on to Mike M. Mike is buying himself a retirement present, and he's thinking about getting a 5-channel amplifier. He'd like to keep the price under $1,000, so he's mostly looking at either Emotiva or Outlaw, but he's questioning what he would really gain in performance by adding an external amp to his system. His room is not fully enclosed. He figures he's dealing with about 3,000 cubic feet. He sits 9 feet away, and his acoustic treatments consist of rugs on the floor and tapestry wall hangings to reduce some reflections. Good. He's running a Marantz SR5011 with Paradigm Prestige front speakers and Atom surrounds. He's got an SVS SB3000 subwoofer and a 60-inch Samsung TV. He's very happy with his current sound, but he recalls from his car audio days how upgrading to a JL audio amplifier made a huge difference over the car's stock audio amp. He wouldn't expect that level of difference, but might he hear some improvement at least? Enough to justify the purchase? I know where he's coming from on the car audio. Boy, that's very true. Any head unit that says we've got 25 watts per channel, well, kind of. There's a big fat asterisk next to that 25 watts per channel, and it does. Boy, you put a much more powerful, real quality amp in a car. That's almost a night and day difference.
A lot of stock audio car systems were basically op amps too. I mean, effectively, they were like 2 watts. A lot of those.
Oh yeah, the built-in came from the factory. I'm talking about I added to my wife's car a Sony that has 25 watts per channel.
Oh, okay,
right, and it's good. It's way better than what was built in.
Oh yeah,
but
exactly.
It is not something that puts out 150 watts per channel with low distortion levels. So in the car world, it's a lot of difference. I don't know that it's as much difference in the home theater world. If you've got a nice quality, let's see, what's he working with already?
I mean, also 9 feet away from Paradigm Prestige speakers, which are really nice speakers, but also really easy to drive. Quite efficient, not super high efficiency, but they're like 90 dB efficient with 1 watt. So, okay, we're back to the null hypothesis again, aren't we? Because again, he's coming from the point of view of, I had an experience where changing an amplifier made an obvious audible difference, disproved the null hypothesis quite easily, and I completely believe that because I have also had that experience of going from a 1 or 2 watt amplifier in a car to 20 watt amplifier, and it makes a tremendous and obvious difference in the dynamics and the headroom that's available.
And just
in
the strength of it, that
the
low
lowering
accuracy.
of distortion and everything in there. But does that translate to, changing your amplifier will always make some difference? And the answer is no, it won't always make even some difference, let alone the kind of difference you heard in the car audio situation. Objectively, from what you've described, if you did a completely blind listening test, no. There's
I mean, you're talking about going from an extremely good distortion level to an extremely good plus a little bit better distortion level.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything, maybe you could lower the noise floor a touch. You could give yourself more headroom. Those Paradigm Prestige speakers can absorb a lot of power if you want them to, more than the SR5011 can supply. But will you ever actually need that from only 9 feet away? And the answer is no. No. I mean, if you were going to do this, all right, I'm in an even smaller room, sitting even closer, and I've got, an ATI amplifier. Why? Why do I have that? Well, vanishingly low noise floor is one reason.
You like to walk up to that speaker and smash your ear against the tweeter and hear nothing.
Yes, I do. And I don't hear absolutely nothing with my ear smashed against the tweeter, but it's pretty close.
That's pretty close.
And also, I bought myself a forever system that essentially can travel to nearly any size of room I'm likely to ever have in the future. And there, I'm already set. So I could say this is a retirement present. Now, first of all, you're probably mostly only care about one seat, so your single SB3000 is probably just fine. But play yourself a sweep. Find out how linear your response actually is, because if it isn't, if it isn't
might
uniform,
be a better upgrade as a second sub.
Your better
placed
upgrade
correctly
could easily be a second sub, which will actually potentially, improve the overall sound of your system much more than an amplifier could. So buying yourself a retirement present, it might be a second sub. I know Tom could also easily get behind that as being a possibility. But if you're going to do this, I would probably point you, instead of the lower cost Emotiva or Outlaw subs, I could probably point you to a monoprice monolith, which is made by ATI. And to fit this same sort of price range, you'd be looking at their 3-channel amplifier, right? The odds of your SR 5011 not being able to power your 2 surround speakers to adequate and satisfactory levels is nothing.
Is 0.
So
it's handling it just fine.
If you might hear any difference, it would be in your front 3 speakers.
And that's a big might.
It's a really big might, but if you're just dead set on this, that's what I would do, because now at least you're getting something that I can objectively tell you is a lower noise floor, which is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're just like, I just love having this gigantic beefy amplifier, nothing will satisfy a love for a gigantic beefy amplifier.
That's
like
legit.
An ATI
that's okay.
monolith.
Yeah. Get it. I mean, if that's what you've always wanted, and this is a present to yourself for retirement, and you're happy with your subwoofer linearity of sound and those frequencies, then that's a good.
But if the sub could use some improvement, put the money there instead of the amp for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Check that first. I agree. This really is the subwoofer show, isn't it? Moving on to John B via Twitter. John says, say you're between 9 and 10 feet from eyes to screen, and you've got a little over $1,000 to buy your display. Should you go for a 65-inch 4K HDR flat panel, like a Vizio or TCL, or should you go for a pull-up projector screen with a 1080p BenQ HD 2050A projector? John's room is light-controlled and only 10 by 13. That's, to me, 2 different worlds. Because to me, you create a very...
We're mostly looking at that viewing distance, aren't we? Between 9 and 10 feet. Let's call it 9.5.
Yeah. So how much of your viewing angle do you want to take up?
Yeah.
And to me, you back up even more and go, because in my brain, a projector is a whole different experience. You know what I mean? Like it creates a completely different feel in a room, even a small room, because it's huge and your brain knows it.
And you got to have it dark.
It's got to be dark.
He's got full light control, so that's okay.
So the experience is very different than, say, what I have, where in my living room, I never make it very dark.
Right.
And you know it's a living room, and the screen is only so big. It takes up so many degrees of my field of vision. So you kind of have to ask yourself that first. How do you want to use this room? And if you really want it to be a lot like a real theater, I'm going to tell you to get the projector screen and a projector.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the difference is, so let's say you're 9.5 feet away. What's your field of view with a 65-inch screen, right? It's under 28 degrees field of view. So
that's probably what I have, because I think I sit about 9 feet from my 65-inch TV, and it's wonderful. But my brain knows it's not a theater.
It's not a theater. Yeah. And so I mean, SEMPTE recommends, that's a Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. They recommend a 30-degree field of view for HD TV, for television.
Or just television.
They want you to have a 30-degree field of view, so you're not quite at that. And then for movies, the recommendation is nothing less than a 36-degree field of view.
Right.
With the recommendation being upwards of 50 to 55 at the max, with about 40 to 45 being sort of the ideal.
So
for most people, these are the people who like to sit 2/3 of the way back in a movie theater.
Yeah.
That's about a 45-degree field of view. If you like to sit closer, maybe you're more of a 50 or 55-degree field of view, that type of thing.
So from 10 feet, how big does that screen have to be to give you that SEMPTE recommended something in the 40-something degree range for movies?
Right. So if you're 9 feet away, you want about a 92-inch screen.
That's big.
You want a 100-inch screen if you want the 45-degree field of view from 9 feet away. And you're not going to get that for $1,000 from a flat panel.
No, you're not.
It's not going to happen. Now, an argument can be strongly made if you're like, the thing I really want most is, bright, punchy HDR, which a projector isn't really going to give you. That 75 inches from 9 feet away, well, now you're right into that 35, 36-degree field of view. You're on the small end of what you might want for movies. But it's got something that a projector's not going to give you at there. But now you're into at least about $1,500 for a Vizio or a TCL and a 75-inch
And I'm here
size.
to tell you, the cheaper big TVs, I was not impressed at all.
Not super impressed. Right?
I was not impressed. The only thing that impressed me besides an OLED were the most expensive LED televisions.
LCDs, yeah.
So, you know, if I'm him and if he took the time to mention his room is light controlled,
Yes.
I'm saying let's turn this into a real theater, even though it's a 10 by 13 room.
I mean, to me, when you're 9.5, 10 feet away, 65 inches is too small. Unless this is just, you know, casual TV watching.
Well, that was
room.
all
Yeah,
I could
that's gotta
afford in
be
my
fine.
case, but
No, but I mean, you've got other considerations as well, right? So, I mean, yours, a
absolutely.
projector would be more difficult, and you wanted what an OLED can provide, and a 77-inch one isn't affordable.
No kidding.
There's other things going on in here, right? But my
Yeah.
inclination is that, you know, it sounds like he's trying to set up a theater situation. 65 inches from 9.5 feet away is less than 28 degrees field of view. That's not even large enough, according to SEMPTE, for HD TV, let alone movies. So all of that leads me to say, well, you could get a BenQ HD 2050A and a projector screen for right around $1,000. That is quite easily doable. And you can get it in a 84, 92, 100-inch screen size and easily get yourself to the 40 to 45 degree field of view for the same price. That's the way I'd have to lean.
Now, be forewarned, if you do this, you become a projector person.
You do?
You enter that world, and I don't know too many people that have come out of that world.
Once you get used to that, you're like, why TVs before?
Yeah,
why?
exactly. So, but you know what? Given the choices he laid out, I'm going projector.
Me too.
That's what I think. Moving on to Christopher M, also via Twitter. Christopher asked the following: front wides, which Atmos receiver models offer them? Can the Denon X4300H use front wides? And I believe Rob has compiled a list.
I have the list. The X4300H cannot do front wides. It doesn't have that capability whatsoever. You have to go the year prior, which is getting difficult these days to find those projectors anymore. You had the X4200W from Denon. That one topped out at being able to use 9 speakers maximum, though. It had 7 amplifiers built in. You could expand it to 9 speakers, but not any further than that. But 2 out of those 9 speakers could be front wides on the X4200W. Then they had the X6200W and the X7200WA. Those could do 11 speakers, 2 of which could be front wides. Now, if you want to get something that is brand new, you could get the X8500H.
What's the price on that?
$4,000. And it can do 13 speakers. In fact, it can power 13 speakers itself, 2 of which can be front wides.
There you go.
Over on Marantz, you've got the SR6010 from the same model year as the X4200W. It's the sister model. It tops out at 9 speakers. It has 7 amplifiers built in. The SR7010, which is the receiver that I have, and I still have it because it still does front wides.
Because Rob loves front wides. If there's one thing I know about Rob, right? I mean, I
do
remember
like my front wides. I like being silly because I still like 3D. I still like front
it's
wides.
okay to like 3D. I like 3D, but only in certain situations. Like I do a lot of my viewing laying over on the couch.
Yeah, I'm not going to work there.
And it doesn't work. So I might watch a football game max in 3D if they had that. A movie, maybe one movie every now and then. So,
but Marantz also had Pre-Pros, ones that don't have any amplifiers built in that can do front wides, and they were going back to that same 3 or 4 years ago now, AV7702 Mark II, or the AV8802A, or their current flagship, the AV8805, which is $5,000 and can do 13 speakers. Yeah.
$5,000.
But it's the flagships. There's what they would do front wide. So are there any other alternatives? Yes, there are. There is the Emotiva RMC1. It can do 16 speakers. It has no amplifiers built in. It's just a pre-pro. It's $5,000. Yeah, $5,000. But it can do 9.1.6. Also, don't buy it.
That's right. The question was what models offer them, not what do you buy.
But don't get that Emotiva RMC1. What is going? Why does Emotiva do this? The HDMI is like totally screwed up on that. There are people in the Emotiva forum who are like, I have these 2 different HD Fury integral devices hooked up to my Emotiva RMC1, and I almost got it working. Shouldn't be that way for $5,000. That's not what you want
out of a $5,000 object.
Also, they promised Dirac Live, still not here. So, yeah, don't get that.
Just don't even get it, yeah.
Monoprice announced their Monolith HTP1, made by ATI, also does 9.1.6, 2 of which can be front wides. It's not out yet. It's going to be $4,000. It's supposed to be out in September. So, yeah, basically, if you want it kind of affordably, you got to go back in time and hope you can find one of those older
So-
Dynamic References. Now, there were some Onkyo models that did front wides, but they got rid of front wides before immersive audio ever came out. So I'm assuming you want your front wides to be part of an Atmos or DTSX.
Yeah, he's asking
setup.
which Atmos receiver models offer them.
Yeah.
So of the list you compiled, what's the least expensive way to do it?
I would want one that can do 11 speakers.
Okay, yeah.
So it would probably be the X6200W.
Okay.
If you can find it. You have a better chance of finding an X7200WA. Those are still floating around out there.
Okay.
And you're looking at probably about $2,000 for one of those. Yeah.
You better like it wide.
Oh, you better need yourself some wides, because you're probably looking more about $4,000.
Oh, man. Just move your speakers farther apart.
I mean, you could track down one of the older Onkyos and just like upmix into front wides as a second AV receiver feeding off of your Zone 2 HDMI output, but then you start running into HDCP problems, so you need an HD Fury. Isn't this fun?
No. Sometimes it is, but that's a little rough. But okay, there's the answer, and we can. I imagine if he needs those model numbers, we can send them to him.
They'll be written up. They'll be written up in the show notes. So that's
Perfect,
all our
yes.
questions. We cleared out the show list. We went past
What?
2 hours, as we often do.
How about that?
Yes,
I stayed with you.
you
through
sure
the
did. I
questions
wasn't
for a
sure. I was
change.
gonna do the last one or two questions. I put those
Nah.
at the end specifically because I'm like, I could answer those. on my
No,
own
it's a
if he
beautiful
needs to kind
spring day. I don't want to go do taxes. I'm here with you, man.
You got an OLED to watch. How's that
Yeah,
OLED treating you?
You know what? The OLED is really nice. I have learned that there's at least one thing I wasn't aware of.
Okay.
That is, it's a negative, but it's a tiny negative.
Okay.
So there's a screen uniformity issue. When you look at an OLED, you will notice that the viewing angles are amazing. You can be 179 degrees, off to one side. You're all the way off to one side, and you still see what looks like substantially clear, accurate picture.
Yeah, and not seeing all the blooming from
Right.
the backlight or anything seeping through.
No, it doesn't. As you move off to the side, it doesn't start fading colors and turning gray, and it's what all those cheapo TCL TVs do. Those LEDs, supposed, good TVs. So, but if you are watching it and being critical, and up comes a full white screen, which I've noticed has happened to me because I watch a lot of YouTube videos.
Right. Sure.
And people like to use, they throw up their little logo screen.
Yeah.
Everybody does the same thing. You go, today we're going to talk about this. And then they play a little quick music and throw up a logo screen. And then they're still sitting there talking. It's just, anyway. So that's how YouTube videos go. But like, pure white or pure very light pastel kind of colors, very pale blue or pale yellow especially, you will see that there is a non-uniformity to an OLED that you can tell a difference even as you move your head left and right, or simply as you look to one side of the screen or the other.
Okay.
So you will, if you get off to one side, I think it's to my left, I start to see the white pixels have an ever so slight red tint. And to my right, the pixels have an ever so slight blue tint. And if I move all the way to one side, I can make the whole screen look ever so slightly bluish. And I'm talking about slight. It's not punching me in the face. It's not really pissing me off.
Does this happen if you're just a dead ahead center, just looking at it, not moving?
If I'm dead ahead center, I can barely see it if I don't move my head.
Okay.
But if I slide my head a little bit now remember, I'm a really picky person, and I've been taking photographs for many years.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this just as critically as possible.
Yes.
But you can see it. My wife thinks I'm insane. She
I mean, it's not showing up as like streaks or like obvious.
This isn't the vertical banding.
Yeah,
I have yet to see anything that would qualify as vertical banding, like in dark shadows or anything like that. And so I'm not gonna go look for it. There's those test screens where you can see it. Yeah, I'm not even gonna look at. Screw that. I'm not looking at that. I'm happy with what I'm seeing as far as that goes. I knew that could be an issue, and I saw it. I remember I bought that OLED first and took it back because I was unhappy with both that and the YouTube app pissed me off.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I don't like it. Well, it turns out that was a good idea because we came back, saved money.
1 year later.
I got a better TV. So just something to think about. It doesn't ruin anything.
Right.
Because rarely...
It's just, it's not perfect.
I mean, it mostly happens during commercials.
Sure.
When somebody puts a big sale, a big logo or something.
I guess, so I sort of come at it from, well, what's the alternative, right? Because when you look at a full white screen on almost any LCD TV, even the flagship Sonys and Samsungs, they have worse uniformity, not necessarily
Yeah.
in this slight color shift that you're describing, but what they call the dirty screen effect, which you can clearly see a non-uniformity in the backlight behind a full white screen,
And
which to me is way worse.
Is it the case that the subpixels on an OLED TV are arranged left to right?
Well,
Like
yeah, they
red,
are,
green,
and they're
blue,
also
left to
different
right?
sizes. Each of the red, green, blue, and white are different sizes as well.
So that's probably what I'm seeing, is that the different color pixels have slightly different viewing angle.
Each of the
change.
subpixels, yeah.
And I think that's what I'm seeing, because honest to goodness, I'll see red to the left and blue to the right.
Yeah. The red is way bigger than all the others.
There you go. And that's why I'm seeing the red the most. And then just on my particular TV, I think there's just a little subtle, like a few millimeters of blue along the left edge before it hits the bezel. Just like this subtle gradient of blue over on the, and I'm talking about, I'm getting nuts here.
That
and
does sound picky, Lee.
It is. But if you want me to tell you exactly everything I'm seeing, there's exactly everything I'm seeing. But like you said, there is no TV better, with the possible exception of the processing on better LG OLEDs.
I guess.
I don't know if that's
because
subpixel things
you mentioned you
better.
do see some color banding
I see
here and there.
some color banding, but most of the color banding I'm seeing, I believe, is due to the source, the compression, and the transmission of it to me.
Because if you're watching like a pristine Ultra HD Blu-ray, the chances of seeing it are probably pretty darn low.
When I watch like even just YouTube 4K HDR, 60 frames per second, oh man, it really looks like real life. It really, I'm so happy with that, and it's so beautiful. But most of my viewing, frankly, is television, and until about I think I've got another.
Oh, you're gonna get banding there, no matter. I mean, even if you have a really good decontouring filter, you can, if it's in the source.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, I have less than a year left committed to Comcast. I hope by then AT&T Fiber, which is in part of my town, will get to me. And if that's the case, I will switch so fast because Comcast has ruined their picture quality. They downgrade everything to 720p.
Right.
And the compression is such that even their own on-demand looks better. The color is better on demand, and the resolution is higher. So if you have like HBO, which is a 1080i broadcast channel, it gives it to you in 720p on the live channel. But if you go watch it on demand, it's 1080 and the color's better. So the compression must just be terrible on their regular channels. It must just be awful. YouTube videos.
Surely the solution would be an 88-inch 8K television.
That must be what I want to do. I want to blow up that 720p blur.
It must.
Yes, if only I could upconvert it to 8K. No, and what's really funny is now I've bought myself a new camera which can do 4K, and the videos coming off that camera look better than any Comcast channel by a lot.
I could see that being the case.
And it's kind of scary because I'm trying to sit there and do a little selfie blogging. I'm like, oh my God, I'm old. Look at the wrinkles. Like every dot. I have to go shave right now. Oh my God. It's just, you almost don't want it to be that good. And I'm like, how do I blur me? So I've got a lot to learn there, but that's my OLED experience so far. Otherwise, the thing's magical and wonderful, and it looks great in the room, and everyone's impressed that comes over. And so that's what it's all about. I'm enjoying movies. So I've calmed down. It was a lot of stress buying that TV. It was a lot of stress.
I feel you on that.
But, it's a pretty good TV. I'm going to chill out about my little red-blue thing as I move. I just don't move. Don't move.
Can't go after perfection. Well, folks, that is it for episode number 638. Lee, thank you so much for pinch hitting and filling in for Tom. Get well soon.
This was fun, and now I guess I have to go do taxes.
You do. If you'd like your questions answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. That's our email address. Please send your questions there. So we want to quickly thank our listeners of the week one last time. That's Brian W., who donated via PayPal, as well as via Patreon, where we have 82 patrons over there, patreon.com/avrant podcast. Also want to thank Keith, who talked us up to Accessories for Less. And folks, if you're over at Xpona, drop by Jeremy Porter's booth. That's Porter Acoustics. For every person who mentions AVRant, he's going to donate $5 to the podcast. So thanks you very much, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you. Thank all of you. And remember, put on a disguise and then talk to Jeremy again.
There you go.
So he has to give us 10.
No one shall be the wiser. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for listening. And on behalf of Tom Andrew, I am Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.